My granddaughter Maya is 10 years old and she has never hugged me without looking over her shoulder first. Last night, during my son's 40th birthday party, she slipped a crumpled piece of paper into my palm under the tablecloth. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terror that no child should ever know. The note said only 7 words. "Grandpa, look under the boat in the garage. I thought she was playing a game. I wish it had been a game. Because when I lifted that kayak in the garage, I didn't just find a secret. I found a death warrant with my son's name on it. I am Desmond King, 73 years old. I spent 40 years as a general contractor in Chicago. I know how to spot a crack in a foundation before the house collapses. But I never saw the crack running through my own family until it was too late. Before I tell you what I found under that boat and how I made them pay, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you believe grandparents have a sixth sense when their grandchildren are in danger. Now let me take you back to the dinner that started it all. The driveway of my son Jamal's house was filled with cars that cost more than the first house I ever built. Mercedes, Tesla, Land Rover. It was a parade of wealth in a gated community where the grass was cut with nail scissors and the silence was heavy enough to weigh you down. I parked my 12-year-old Ford pickup truck right in front. It had a few dents and the paint was fading, but the engine was solid. It was the only honest thing on that entire block. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had put on my best Sunday suit, the charcoal one I wore to church and funerals. I brushed my gray beard, took a deep breath, and grabbed the gift I had bought for Jamal. It was a vintage watch restored by hand. It wasn't flashy, but it had a heartbeat. When I walked to the front door, I could already hear the music. Smooth jazz, tasteful quiet. Everything about Jamal's life now was tasteful and quiet. The door opened before I could knock. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was 32 years old, blonde, and worked as some sort of lifestyle influencer on social media. She was wearing a white dress that looked like it cost $5,000, and her smile was as bright and cold as a refrigerator light. "Oh, Desmond, you made it," she said. Her voice went up an octave, the way people talk to toddlers or pets. "We were worried you might get lost. The GPS on those old trucks can be so unreliable." I stepped inside. The air conditioning was set so low it felt like walking into a meat locker. I held out a bottle of wine I had brought. It was a decent Cabernet. Tiffany took it with 2 fingers as if it were a dirty diaper. "Thank you, Desmond," she said, handing it immediately to a passing waiter without looking at the label. "We will put this in the back. We are serving a specific organic Pinot Noir tonight to match the palate of the meal. Why don't you head to the patio? That is where most of the guests are." I walked through the house. I had helped Jamal with the down payment for this place 5 years ago. I had inspected the framing myself. It was a good structure, solid bones, but now filled with white leather furniture and abstract art that looked like spilled milk. It felt like a hospital waiting room. The patio was crowded. Most of the guests were Tiffany's friends, not Jamal's. Young, wealthy, sipping drinks and laughing with their mouths open, but their eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. I saw Jamal across the pool, my son. He looked tired. He had lost weight since the last time I saw him. His suit hung a little loose on his shoulders. He was nodding at a man who was talking about cryptocurrency, but Jamal's eyes were glazed over. I started to walk toward him, but a hand touched my arm. It was Tiffany again. She had moved faster than I expected. "Desmond, wait," she whispered. Her grip on my bicep was surprisingly strong, her nails dug into my jacket. "Before you go over there, can we have a tiny chat?" I looked down at her. "What is it, Tiffany?" She lowered her voice, leaning in close. I could smell her perfume. It smelled like chemicals and expensive flowers. "It is just that, well, we have some very important investors here tonight. People who are crucial for Jamal's new software venture. And I don't want to be rude, but you have a certain scent." I stiffened. "I showered an hour ago, Tiffany. I used soap." No, it is not that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. It is an old scent. Like mothballs and old grease. It is very distinct. And your hands." She looked down at my hands. They were large, rough, calloused from decades of laying brick and pouring concrete. They were the hands that paid for her college tuition, though she didn't know that. They look a bit unhygienic for the buffet line. I would hate for the guests to feel uncomfortable eating. My blood ran hot, a familiar heat I hadn't felt since I was a young man facing foremen who didn't want a black man on their crew. I looked her dead in the eye. These hands built half the skyline of this city, Tiffany. Dirt washes off. Disrespect doesn't. She didn't flinch. She just smiled that frozen smile. Of course, Desmond. We are all so proud of your manual labor history, but tonight is about Jamal's future. Please, just do me a favor. I have set up a lovely spot for you at the table in the corner near the garden entrance. It is quieter there. You won't have to shout over the music to be heard, and I will have the servers bring you a plate so you don't have to worry about touching the serving spoons. It is for the best. She patted my arm and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone patio. Click, 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 like a countdown. I stood there feeling the heat rise up my neck. I looked around. No one was looking at me. I was invisible to them. Just an old black man in an outdated suit standing in the way of the bar. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get in my truck and drive until the gas tank was dry. But then I looked at Jamal again. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen his wife stop me. He had seen her point me to the corner table like a misbehaving child. And he did nothing. He took a sip of his wine and turned back to the cryptocurrency man. That hurt more than anything Tiffany could have said. I walked to the corner table. It was practically in the bushes. It was the only table that didn't have a centerpiece or a tablecloth. It was the overflow table. I sat down, my knees aching a little from the humidity. I watched my son from a distance. He was laughing now, a fake hollow laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I sat there for 20 minutes. A waiter came by and dropped a plate in front of me without stopping. It was a small portion of salad and a piece of dry chicken. No bread, no drink. I pushed the plate away. Then I saw her. Maya. My granddaughter was standing by the sliding glass door. She was 10, but she looked 7. She was thin, her collarbones sticking out from the neck of her expensive dress. She had dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't playing with the other kids who were running around the yard. She was watching Tiffany. Tiffany was busy charming a group of women near the pool. Maya waited until Tiffany's back was turned. Then she moved. She didn't walk. She scurried, keeping low, moving behind the chairs and the guests. She was moving like a soldier behind enemy lines. She reached my table and ducked under it. Maya, I whispered, leaning down. What are you doing, baby girl? Come up here and give Grandpa a hug. Shh, she hissed. Her voice was trembling. Don't look at me. Look at the party. Act normal. She grabbed my hand under the table. Her hand was ice cold and sweaty. She pressed a piece of paper into my palm. It was small, folded tight, sharp edges digging into my skin. What is this? I asked. She squeezed my hand hard, her fingernails digging in. She is going to hurt him, Grandpa, she whispered. Her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it over the jazz music. She makes him drink the green stuff. He gets sick every time. She says it is medicine, but it is not. Maya, slow down, I said, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. Who, Tiffany? She flinched at the name. The sound of heels clicking on the pavement echoed nearby. Click, click, click. Maya's eyes went wide. She let go of my hand, read the note she breathed. But not here. Don't let her see it. Please, Grandpa. She scrambled out from under the table and ran back toward the house. A second later, Tiffany appeared around the corner. She looked at me, then at the spot where Maya had just been. Her eyes narrowed. A flicker of suspicion crossed her face, cracking the perfect mask for just a second. Everything okay over here, Desmond? She asked. You look like you have seen a ghost. I clenched my fist around the paper in my hand. I kept my face blank, just admiring the landscaping Tiffany. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for something. Then she smiled again. Good. Enjoy the chicken. She walked away. I waited until she was fully back in the crowd. My hands were shaking not from age, but from a rage that was starting to boil in my gut. I opened my hand. The paper was a torn corner of a homework assignment. On the back, written in shaky pencil letters, was the message that would end my life as I knew it. Grandpa, look under the boat in the garage. You'll know the whole truth. I looked at the garage. It was a detached building, a 3-car structure on the other side of the driveway. Tiffany kept her pride and joy in there, a custom pink kayak she used for her wellness retreats. I looked at Jamal, who was now holding his chest, looking pale and sweating despite the cool evening. I stood up. I didn't care about the party. I didn't care about the guests. I walked straight past the buffet, past the pool, and toward the side gate. I needed to get to that garage if my granddaughter was scared something was wrong, and Desmond King didn't ignore cracks in the foundation. I was going to find out what was under that boat even if I had to tear this whole mansion down brick by brick to do it. The walk from the patio to the driveway felt like the longest mile I have ever traveled. The jazz music faded behind me, replaced by the hum of crickets and the blood pounding in my ears. I told the valet I needed to get my heart medication from the glove box of my truck. It was the perfect excuse. People always believe an old man is 5 minutes away from a heart attack. They never suspect he is 5 minutes away from uncovering a crime scene. I reached my truck, opened the door, and grabbed a bottle of aspirin just for show, but I didn't stay there. I slipped around the side of the 3-car garage. Jamal had installed a keypad lock on the side door years ago, bragging about the security system. But I was the one who framed the doorway. I knew the strike plate was a 1/4 inch off-center because the wood had warped that first winter. I didn't need a code. I just needed a stiff credit card and the right amount of pressure on the jamb. I slid my old union membership card into the crack. Shimmy up, shimmy down, push, click. The door swung open. I stepped inside and closed it softly behind me. The garage smelled like epoxy floor cleaner and lavender, not like oil and gasoline like a garage should. It was pristine. Jamal's Tesla was plugged into the wall like a giant appliance. Next to it was Tiffany's white Range Rover. And there, hanging from the ceiling on a motorized pulley system, was the pink kayak. It was bright neon pink, a symbol of her active lifestyle that she posted about every day on Instagram. Maya's note burned in my pocket. Look under her boat. The boat was suspended about 7 feet in the air. I looked for the control switch on the wall to lower it, but I stopped. The motor would be loud. It would hum and vibrate through the walls. I couldn't risk it. I looked around. There was a workbench in the corner, clean, barely touched, just a few decorative tools that looked brand new. I grabbed a sturdy step stool and dragged it over. I am 73 years old. My knees complain when it rains and my back stiffness up if I sit too long. But right then, adrenaline was the best painkiller in the world. I climbed the stool. I was eye level with the hull of the kayak. I ran my hand along the bottom, smooth plastic. Nothing. I felt inside the cockpit, just the seat. I frowned. Was this a mistake? Was Maya just a confused child? But then I remembered the terror in her eyes. Maya wasn't confused. She was desperate. I looked closer at the seat. It was a foam cushion snapped into place. I dug my fingers under the edge of the foam and pulled. It popped loose. And there it was. Tape. Silver duct tape layers of it holding a black waterproof dry bag against the inner hull of the boat. It was taped so tight it looked like part of the plastic. I used my pocket knife, a buck knife I've carried since 1978, to slice through the tape. I pulled the bag out. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. I climbed down from the stool, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I moved to the workbench and turned on a small desk lamp, keeping the main overhead lights off. I unrolled the top of the dry bag. The first thing I pulled out was a passport. I opened it. The photo was Tiffany. Same blonde hair, same cold smile, but the name wasn't Tiffany King. It was Sarah Jenkins. I pulled out a second passport. Same photo, different hairstyle, brunette. Name Emily Thorne. I pulled out a third, redhead. Name Rachel Vance. My hands started to shake. 3 identities, 3 lives. This wasn't just a woman who married for money. This was a professional predator, a chameleon. I had heard stories about women like this in prison grifters who moved from state to state, leaving a trail of bankrupt men and unexplained deaths behind them. I dug deeper into the bag. There was a small leather-bound notebook. I opened it. It looked like a food diary. Every page was dated. The entries were meticulous. June 12th, morning smoothie, 2 scoops protein, 5G powder. June 13th, Jamal complained of nausea, reduced to 3G. Keep steady. June 14th, he slept 14 hours, increased to 6G tomorrow. The doctors suspect fatigue syndrome. Perfect. I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a diet, it was a dosage log. She was documenting the poisoning of my son like it was a science experiment. She was adjusting the levels, testing his tolerance, pushing him right to the edge of death, and then pulling back just enough to keep the doctors confused. That green stuff Maya talked about. It wasn't kale. It was death in a glass. I turned the page. Tucked into the back of the notebook was a folded document. The paper was thick, formal. I unfolded it. It was a life insurance policy. Beneficiary Tiffany King. Insured Jamal King. pay out some $5 million. I scanned the bottom. Jamal's signature was there, but it looked shaky weak, like he had signed it while he was drunk or drugged, and right next to it was the date. It was signed 3 months ago. But the most chilling part was a small sticky note attached to the front of the policy in Tiffany's handwriting. It just said, 4th of July weekend. That was 2 weeks away. I stared at the paper. The room seemed to spin. She wasn't just killing him, she was scheduling it. She had a deadline. She was going to kill my son, collect $5 million, and vanish into one of these other identities. She would probably take that kayak out on a lake claim Jamal had an accident, or maybe she would just let his heart stop in his sleep and blame it on the stress she had been feeding the doctors. I looked at the passports again. Sarah, Emily, Rachel. How many other men were buried in the ground behind these names? How many other families had she destroyed? My son, my boy, who I taught to ride a bike, who I put through college, working double shifts. He was sleeping next to a monster every night. He was kissing the mouth that was poisoning him. I felt a tear run down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. This wasn't the time for grief. This was the time for war. I needed to take this bag. I needed to go straight to the police station. I reached for the bag to shove everything back in. Click. The sound was loud, mechanical. It wasn't the side door this time. It was the big bay door. The motor whirred to life, a low groan that echoed off the epoxy floor. The heavy door began to roll up, letting the streetlights flood in. I froze. There was nowhere to hide. I was standing at the workbench, the passports and the poison log spread out like a game of solitaire. The door rose fully, and there she was, Tiffany. She wasn't wearing her party smile anymore. She was standing in the driveway, silhouetted by the security floodlights. She held a glass of red wine in one hand. In the other, she held her phone. The light from the screen illuminated her face from below, making her look like a ghost. She didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the garage. She saw me. She saw the step stool. She saw the kayak swinging slightly from where I had touched it. She took a step inside. The motion sensor light on the ceiling clicked on, flooding the garage with harsh white LED brilliance. I instinctively threw my hand over the papers on the bench covering the passports, but I knew it was too late. "Desmond," she said. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I thought you were getting heart medication. Did you get lost? Or did you decide to do a little structural inspection of my garage?" She took another step closer. Her heels clicked on the concrete. Click. Click. I turned to face her, my body blocking the view of the workbench. My hand was behind my back, clutching the dry bag. "I was just looking at the kayak, Tiffany," I said. My voice was rough like gravel mixer. "Maya told me you had a nice boat. I wanted to see the mounting bracket. Safety first." Tiffany stopped 5 feet away from me. She tilted her head. Her eyes drifted from my face to the kayak, and then to the workbench behind me. She sniffed the air like an animal scenting fear. "Maya talks too much," she said softly. "That child has such a vivid imagination. I really need to have a talk with her about privacy." She looked me dead in the eye, and then she smiled. But this wasn't the fake smile from the party. This was a predator's smile. It was the smile of someone who realizes the game is up and decides to stop pretending. "What is behind your back, Desmond?" she asked. Nothing, I said. She took another sip of wine, never breaking eye contact. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "Accidents happen in garages all the time. Old men slip on smooth floors. Heavy tools fall from shelves. It would be such a tragedy if Jamal lost his father right before his birthday cake was served." She reached into her pocket with her free hand. For a second, I thought she was pulling out a gun. My muscles tensed, ready to charge. But she pulled out a key fob. She pressed a button. The garage door behind her began to lower. The motor groaned again. The exit was closing. We were being sealed in. She didn't move. She just stood there, blocking my path, watching the door come down, cutting off the view of the street, cutting off the party, cutting off my escape. "Show me what you found, Desmond," she commanded, "or I start screaming that you tried to touch me. And who do you think Jamal will believe? His beautiful, loving wife, or his jealous, senile father who just broke into his home?" The garage door hit the floor with a final thud. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before. It was just me, her, and the evidence of her crimes. I gripped the buck knife in my pocket. I looked at the woman who planned to murder my son on the 4th of July. I don't think Jamal will believe either of us, I said, my voice steady now. I think he will believe the math. Math. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. What math? The math of how much poison it takes to kill a 200-pound man, I said. Her smile vanished. The glass of wine in her hand trembled just a little, and that was when I knew. I had the leverage. But being right and being alive are two different things, and in that locked garage, I wasn't sure which one I was going to be by morning. The silence in that garage was heavier than any concrete slab I had ever poured. The air was thick with the smell of tire rubber, and the expensive perfume Tiffany wore a scent that was starting to make my stomach turn. The garage door was down, sealing us in. Outside, the muffled sounds of jazz and laughter seemed like they were coming from a different planet. Inside, it was just me, a 73-year-old man with a bad knee, and a woman who had planned a murder with the precision of an architect. Tiffany stood between me and the only exit. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. She didn't look scared. She looked bored. That was the most terrifying thing about her. Most people, when caught, they panic. They stutter. Their eyes dart around the room. Tiffany just stared at me with that flat, shark-like gaze. "You are quiet, Desmond," she said, her voice echoing slightly off the metal walls. Usually men of your generation love to lecture. They love to tell me how to run my house, how to spend my money, how to feed my husband. But now you are mute. Is it because you know you are trespassing? I tightened my grip on the dry bag behind my back. My knuckles were white. I could feel the outline of the passports through the fabric. I needed to stall. I needed to think. If I showed her what I found, if I waved those passports in her face, she wouldn't break down and confess. She would destroy me. "I am not trespassing, Tiffany," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "This is my son's house. I built the deck out back. I reinforced the roof. I have a right to be in his garage." She laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Rights. That is a funny word coming from you. Do you think Jamal knows about your little vacation in the 80s? My blood went cold. I hadn't thought about 1982 in years. I hadn't thought about the night a man tried to drag my sister into an alley and I used a tire iron to make sure he never walked right again. The police didn't care about my sister's safety. They only cared that a black man had assaulted a white man. I did 3 years. 3 years of missing my son's childhood to protect my family. "Jamal knows," I said. "I told him everything when he turned 18. "Does he?" she asked, tilting her head. "Does he know the details? Or did you give him the heroic version? Because I did a little background check when we got engaged. Assault with a deadly weapon, grievous bodily harm. You are a violent man, Desmond. You have a record. A documented history of snapping when things don't go your way." She took a step closer, the wine glass dangerously close to tipping. "So here is how this is going to play out," she continued, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You are going to hand over whatever you stole from my workbench, and then you are going to leave. If you don't, I am going to scream. I am going to scream so loud the neighbors 3 streets over will hear. I will tear my dress. I will smash this glass and cut my own arm. And when the police arrive, who do you think they will believe? The weeping, terrified wife of a wealthy engineer, or the ex-convict father-in-law who broke into the garage and has a history of violence?" I looked at her, and I knew she would do it. She would destroy her own reputation. She would hurt herself just to put me away. She held all the cards. She had the status, the skin color, the money. All I had was the truth, and in a system like this, the truth is often the first casualty. My mind raced. I couldn't give her the bag. If I gave her the bag, the evidence was gone. The passports, the poison log, the insurance policy, she would burn them before the police car even turned the corner. But I couldn't walk out with it either. She was watching my hands like a hawk. I needed a diversion. I needed to play the role she expected me to play. She saw me as a pathetic, broken old man, a man who was jealous of her wealth, a man with vices. I let my shoulders slump. I let the defiance drain out of my face, replacing it with a look of shame. I looked down at my shoes. "You win, Tiffany," I mumbled. I moved my hands from behind my back, but I didn't bring out the dry bag. Earlier, when I walked to the truck to get my medicine, I had grabbed the bottle of Cabernet I brought as a gift, the one she had dismissed at the door. I had tucked it into the deep inner pocket of my oversized suit jacket, thinking I would drink it myself later since she wouldn't serve it. When I was behind the workbench in the shadows, I had managed to shove the waterproof bag down the back of my waistband under my jacket and pull the wine bottle out. It was a clumsy move, a desperate sleight of hand, but the workbench had covered my waist. I held out the bottle of wine. "I just wanted a drink," I said, my voice trembling with fake embarrassment. "You said you weren't serving this inside. You said it wasn't good enough for your guests. I didn't want it to go to waste. I came in here to find a corkscrew." Tiffany stared at the bottle. She blinked. For a second, she looked confused. She had expected stolen jewelry or maybe cash from the safe. She hadn't expected a cheap bottle of wine. The tension in the room snapped. Her shoulders relaxed and a look of pure disgust washed over her face. "You broke into my garage." "For alcohol?" she asked, disbelief dripping from every word. "I am an old man, Tiffany," I said, looking at the floor. "It is a long drive home. I just wanted a sip to calm my nerves." She shook her head, a smirk returning to her lips. It was a smirk of victory. She thought she had figured me out. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't a hero. I was just a sad, alcoholic old man stealing his own gift back because he wasn't welcome at the party. "Pathetic," she whispered. "You are absolutely pathetic." She snatched the bottle from my hand. "Get out," she spat. "Get out of my house. Get out of my driveway. If I see your truck here again, I will file that restraining order so fast your head will spin. And don't think I won't tell Jamal about this. He needs to know his father is a thief and a drunk." She turned and hit the button on the wall. The garage door groaned and began to rise. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of jasmine and charcoal. I didn't argue. I didn't look up. I kept my head down, playing the beaten dog. I walked past her, feeling the cold radiation of her hatred. As I passed, I could feel the dry bag pressing against the small of my back. It felt like a brick of solid gold evidence. I walked out onto the driveway. The party was still going. People were laughing, glasses clinking. They had no idea that a few feet away a murder was being negotiated. "Dad." The voice was weak, raspy. I looked up. Jamal was standing by the back door of the house. He was leaning heavily against the door frame as if his legs couldn't quite hold his weight. Under the yellow porch light, his skin looked gray. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark, bruised circles. He looked 20 years older than he was. He looked like a man who was already dying. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him, tell him to spit out whatever she had given him, tell him to run. But I saw Tiffany emerging from the garage behind me, the wine bottle in her hand, her face composed into a mask of concern. "Jamal, honey." She called out, rushing past me to support him. "What are you doing out here? You know the doctor said you need to rest. The night air is bad for your lungs." She wrapped her arm around his waist. To anyone else, it looked like a loving embrace. To me, it looked like a python squeezing its prey. "I was looking for Dad." Jamal wheezed. "I saw the garage door open. Your father was just leaving," Tiffany said, shooting me a warning glare over Jamal's shoulder. He wasn't feeling well. He got confused about where he parked." Jamal looked at me. His eyes were cloudy, confused. "Dad, you leaving already? We haven't even cut the cake." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I had to leave him. If I stayed, she would call the police. If the police came, they would find the bag on me. I would be arrested and the evidence would be lost in the chaos. I had to get this evidence to a lawyer. I had to save him the right way. "Yeah, son," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it cracked my face. "I am feeling a little tired. Old bones, you know." Jamal looked disappointed. He looked like a little boy who had been promised a trip to the park only to have it rain. "Okay, Dad. Thanks for the watch. It is really nice." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his whole body. Tiffany rubbed his back, her hand moving in slow, hypnotic circles. "Come inside, baby," she cooed. "I made you a special herbal tea. It will help you sleep." She led him back into the house. Before she closed the door, she looked back at me one last time. Her eyes said everything. "I won. You lost. He is mine." The door clicked shut. I stood alone in the driveway. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I walked to my truck, my legs feeling like lead. I climbed in and locked the door. I reached behind my back and pulled out the dry bag. I threw it on the passenger seat. I started the engine. The old Ford roared to life, a rough, angry sound. I looked at the house one last time. I saw the light go on in the master bedroom window. I saw a shadow move across the curtain. She thought it was over. She thought she had scared me off. She thought she had shamed me into silence. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway past the Teslas and the Mercedes. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence, the road stretching out before me. She was wrong. She hadn't scared me off. She had just given me the motive. And now I had the weapon. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to war. And unlike her, I wasn't going to fight with poison and secrets. I was going to fight with the only thing that hits harder than a tire iron, the cold, hard, documented truth. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. "Goldberg," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "Wake up. I need you to meet me at your office, now, and bring your best magnifying glass. We are going hunting. 7 days." That is how long it took for the other shoe to drop. 7 days of me sitting in my kitchen, staring at a bag of passports and a poison log, paralyzed by the fear that if I went to the police too soon, she would destroy the evidence, but if I waited too long, she would destroy my son. I was trying to build a case, trying to find a lawyer who wouldn't look at an ex-con black man and laugh. But Tiffany moved faster. She didn't wait for the 4th of July. She accelerated the timeline. The call came at 2 in the morning. It wasn't Maya, it wasn't Tiffany. It was an automated system from St. Jude's Medical Center notifying me that Jamal King had been admitted to the ICU. The robotic voice said he was in critical condition. It didn't say why, but I knew why. The dosage log in my possession said she was planning to increase the toxin on Tuesday. It was Tuesday. I drove to the hospital like a man possessed. My old truck rattled and shook as I pushed it past 80 on the expressway. I didn't care about speed cameras. I didn't care about my own safety. All I could see was my son's face, gray and sweating the way he looked in the driveway. All I could hear was the silence of that house, a silence that was slowly suffocating him. I parked the truck on the curb of the emergency entrance, not caring if they towed it. I ran through the sliding glass doors, my boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and cheap coffee, the smell of bad news. I rushed to the front desk. "Jamal King," I gasped, gripping the counter. "My son, Jamal King. Where is he?" The nurse behind the glass looked up. She was young, tired. She tapped on her keyboard. "King, ICU room 402. "But sir, you can't go up there right now. The doctors are stabilizing him." I didn't listen. I turned toward the elevators. I had to see him. I had to tell the doctors to pump his stomach. I had to scream the truth until someone listened. I made it 3 steps before a wall of muscle stepped in my path. 2 security guards. They were big, wearing tactical vests, their hands resting on their belts. They didn't look surprised to see me. They looked like they had been waiting. "Mr. Desmond King," the taller one asked. He wasn't asking. He was confirming a target. "Yes, that is me. My son is dying upstairs. Move." I tried to step around him, but he sidestepped, blocking me again. He held up a hand, palm out, a gesture of absolute authority. "Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately," the guard said. His voice was flat, bored. "We have strict instructions. You are not permitted on hospital grounds." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the words. "What? That is my boy. I am his father. Who gave you instructions?" The guard reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. It wasn't a hospital form. It was a court order. An emergency temporary restraining order. I unfolded it, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the key phrases jumped out like neon signs. Petitioner Tiffany King, respondent Desmond King. Allegations: physical intimidation, verbal abuse, trespassing, attempted theft, threats of violence against the petitioner and her husband. She didn't just lock me out of the house. She locked me out of his life. She had gone to a judge probably the next morning and spun a story about a violent, unhinged ex-convict father-in-law who was harassing her family. And the system, the blind, broken system, had given her exactly what she wanted. "She says you threatened her in her garage last week," the guard said, watching me closely. "She says you were drunk and brandishing a weapon. The hospital has a zero-tolerance policy for domestic threats, Mr. King. If you don't leave, we will arrest you." I looked up from the paper. Through the glass doors of the waiting room down the hall, I saw her. "Tiffany, She was sitting in a chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. A doctor was standing next to her, patting her back, comforting the grieving wife. She looked like an angel of sorrow. She was performing the role of her life. And inside that room, my son was dying, and the doctors were treating him for a heart condition he didn't have because she had told them it was genetic. She had told them about his family history. She was probably telling them right now that his father's stress was contributing to his decline. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal roar of rage that wanted to tear this hospital down. I wanted to smash through the guards, shatter the glass, and drag her out by her hair. I wanted to show them the monster underneath the makeup, but I didn't. I froze. The heat in my blood turned to ice. I looked at the guard. I looked at the paper in my hand, and I remembered 1998. I was a general contractor then working on a mid-rise project in the South Loop. The developer was a crook. He tried to stiff me on the final payment, claiming my work was substandard. He had high-priced lawyers. He had the city inspectors in his pocket. He thought he could bully a black contractor into walking away. He thought I would get angry, make a scene, and give him an excuse to void the contract. I didn't get angry. I went to the Hall of Records. I dug up the original land surveys. I found a zoning violation from 1920 that voided his building permit if he didn't use union labor for the foundation. He hadn't. I didn't punch him. I put a mechanic's lien on his property that froze his assets for 6 months. I strangled his cash flow until he begged me to take the check. I looked at Tiffany through the glass. She wasn't just a murderer, she was a bad developer. She was trying to condemn a building my son to collect the insurance. But she had rushed the paperwork. Violence puts you in a cell. Strategy puts you in control. I carefully folded the restraining order and put it in my pocket. I looked the guard in the eye. "I am leaving," I said. My voice was calm, scary calm. The guard blinked, surprised by my sudden compliance. "Good. Don't come back, Mr. King." I walked out of the hospital. I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat, the rain starting to drum against the roof. It was a lonely sound. I looked at the hospital windows, rows of yellow squares against the dark sky. Somewhere in there, Jamal was fighting for every breath. "Hang on, son," I whispered to the windshield. "Just hang on. I can't come through the front door, so I am going to tear up the floorboards." I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. The police respect restraining orders. I needed someone who respected nothing but the win. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. Saul Goldberg. He answered on the third ring. His voice was gravelly thick with cigar smoke and whiskey. "Desmond. It is 3 a.m. You better be in jail or dead. I am neither Saul, but my son will be dead by the weekend if you don't wake up." There was a pause. I heard the rustle of sheets, the click of a bedside lamp. "Talk to me." She filed a restraining order, Saul. "Blocked me from the ICU. She is poisoning him, and she has the doctors convinced it is genetic heart failure. I have the proof, but it is stolen fruit. Poisoned tree. If I go to the cops, they toss it and arrest me." Goldberg was silent for a moment. I could hear his brain working, the gears grinding. He was the only lawyer in Chicago who had successfully sued the city for police misconduct in the 80s and won. He was a shark, but he was my shark. "You have the chain of custody on the evidence," he asked. "No. I took it from her garage. I broke in." Goldberg sighed. "That is messy, Desmond. That is very messy. You give that to the DA and any halfway decent defense attorney shreds it. They will say you planted it. They will say you are the bitter, estranged father framing the young, pretty wife." "I know," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "That is why I need you. I don't need to win in court next year. I need to stop her tonight. I need a loophole, Saul. I need a wrecking ball." Goldberg chuckled a dry, dark sound. "You always did like the hard way. Okay. If we can't use the evidence to arrest her yet, we use it to scare the hell out of the doctors. We don't need to prove she is guilty to a judge. We just need to create enough reasonable doubt that the hospital is terrified of a malpractice lawsuit if they let him die." "How do we do that?" "We go after the diagnosis," Goldberg said. "You said she claims it is genetic." "Yeah. She told them the King men have weak hearts." I looked at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. 73 years old. Still working. Still fighting. My father lived to be 90. My grandfather was a slave who lived to be 85. "Saul," I said, "the only thing weak about the King men is our taste in women." I heard Goldberg light a cigar. "Meet me at the diner on 4th. Bring the notebook you found." And Desmond, yeah, bring your checkbook. War isn't cheap. I started the truck. I had spent my life building things up. Now for the first time I was going to use every trick I knew to tear someone's life apart. I looked up at the fourth floor one last time. Tiffany thought she had built a fortress around my son. She didn't know she was dealing with a man who knew exactly where to place the dynamite. I put the truck in gear and drove into the night. The contractor was back on the job. The rain in Chicago cuts through you like a dull knife, cold and relentless. I sat in my truck across the street from St. Jude's Elementary, the windshield wipers slapping back and forth, counting down the seconds. I shouldn't have been there. My lawyer, Saul Goldberg, had told me to lay low. He told me that with a restraining order on my record hovering around my granddaughter's school would look like stalking. But Saul didn't understand. He looked at the law. I looked at the timeline. Tiffany was moving fast. My son was in a hospital bed fading away, and the only person who knew the truth inside that house was a 10-year-old girl. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to know if Tiffany was still feeding him that poison even in the ICU. At 3 o'clock the bell rang. It wasn't a loud clang like the schools I went to. It was a soft electronic chime, polite and expensive. The doors opened and a flood of children in navy blue uniforms poured out. I scanned the crowd. I looked for the messy hair, the scuffed knees, the spark of energy. But when I saw Maya, my heart sank. She wasn't running. She was walking with her head down her backpack, looking heavy enough to crush her. She walked to the edge of the pickup zone, standing away from the other kids. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. I rolled down the passenger window. I couldn't shout. I couldn't draw attention. I waited until the teacher on duty was distracted by a parent in a minivan. "Maya," I whispered. It was barely a sound, but she heard it. She froze. She looked around, terrified. Then she saw my truck. For a second, I thought she was going to run away. But then, her face crumpled. It was the look of a soldier who finally sees reinforcements. She checked the teacher, then sprinted across the wet pavement to my truck. "Grandpa," she gasped, leaning into the window. The rain matted her hair to her forehead. "You have to leave. She said the police are looking for you. She said you are a bad man who wants to hurt Daddy." I reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. My hand looked so big and rough next to her small cheek. "Listen to me, baby girl. I am not a bad man. I am trying to save him. But I can't get into the hospital. They blocked me. I need you to be my eyes. What is happening at home? Is she still giving him the drinks?" Maya's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. She sniffed, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Even before the hospital, every morning, the green smoothie, she puts the powder in it. She keeps it in a special jar in the spice rack behind the cinnamon. She calls it his superfood. But Grandpa Daddy gets so tired after he drinks it. He slurs his words. Yesterday before the ambulance came, he fell down in the hallway. He couldn't even stand up. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles turned white. It was exactly what was in the notebook. The gradual increase. The mimicking of fatigue. "Did you tell anyone?" I asked. "Did you tell the doctors I tried?" She sobbed. "I tried to tell the lady in the white coat when they took him away. But Tiffany..." She grabbed my arm. She told the doctor I was just acting out because I was scared. She told them I make up stories for attention. Maya looked down at her arm. She pulled up the sleeve of her navy blue sweater. "Look, Grandpa." I leaned in. On the soft skin of her upper arm there was a bruise. It wasn't a bump from falling down. It was the distinct purple outline of 3 fingers. A pinch. A hard, vicious pinch meant to silence a child without leaving a mark that would be obvious to a casual observer. My vision blurred with red. I felt a heat in my chest that wanted to burn the world down. That woman had put her hands on my granddaughter. She was poisoning my son and torturing his child. I wanted to drive the truck through the school gates. I wanted to roar. But I swallowed the rage. Rage wouldn't help Maya. Evidence would. "Maya, listen to me," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "You are brave. You are the bravest girl I know. But I need you to be a spy for me. I need to know exactly what that powder is." Maya reached into her backpack. She looked around again, her eyes darting like a frightened bird. "I knew you would come," she whispered. "I stole some." My breath caught in my throat. "You what? I stole some," she repeated. While the paramedics were putting Daddy on the stretcher, she was distracted. I went to the kitchen. I took a little bit of the green powder and put it in my pencil case. She pulled out a small plastic container. It was an old container for mechanical pencil lead, clear and narrow. Inside, packed tight, was a fine greenish-gray dust. I took the container. It felt heavier than lead. It felt like the smoking gun. "Be careful, Grandpa," she whispered. "It smells bitter, like old leaves." I looked at the powder. Oleander. It had to be. Dried ground oleander leaves. Deadly toxic, affecting the heart, hard to detect if you aren't looking for it. A classic poison for a woman who wanted to play the grieving widow. "You are a hero, Maya," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You just saved his life. Hey, you!" The shout cracked through the air like a whip. I looked up. The teacher on duty, a woman in a yellow raincoat, was marching toward the truck. She had seen Maya leaning into the window of a beat-up pickup truck with an old man inside. In her eyes, I wasn't a grandfather. I was a predator. Or worse, I was the violent, estranged relative Tiffany had warned the school about. "Maya, get away from that vehicle," the teacher screamed, reaching for her radio. Maya jumped back, terror flooding her eyes again. "Go, Grandpa!" she cried. "Go before she calls the police!" I looked at my granddaughter standing in the rain, small and defenseless. I wanted to jump out and explain. I wanted to tell the teacher that I was the good guy, that I was the protector. But I knew how I looked. I was a black man in a rich neighborhood violating a restraining order, taking something from a child. If the police came, they wouldn't ask questions. They would handcuff me and they would find the powder. They would say I was the one poisoning him. They would say I was giving it to the girl. I couldn't risk it. I had the sample. I had to get it to the lab. "I love you, Maya," I said. "Stay strong. I am coming back for you. I promise." I threw the truck into gear. I saw the teacher running, grabbing Maya by the shoulder and pulling her back, shielding her from me. I saw her lifting her radio to her mouth, calling in my license plate. I stepped on the gas. The tires spun on the wet asphalt, screeching as I pulled away. I watched Maya in the rearview mirror until she was just a small blue dot in the rain. I hated myself for leaving her. It felt like abandoning a soldier on the battlefield. But I had the weapon now. I touched the small plastic container in my pocket. Tiffany thought she had cut off my access. She thought she had silenced the family. But she forgot one thing. She forgot that children see everything. And she forgot that I knew people who could analyze a speck of dust and tell you exactly where it was grown and how fast it would kill you. I drove toward the industrial district. I wasn't going to a police station. I was going to a private lab run by a guy who owed me a favor from the days when I renovated his facility off the books. I needed proof. Scientific, undeniable proof. My phone buzzed. It was Goldberg. "Where are you?" he asked. "I have the sample," I said. "How? Don't ask. Just get the papers ready for custody. Because once I get these results, I am not just coming for my son. I am coming for the granddaughter she just bruised," Desmond Goldberg warned. "If you went near that school—" I hung up. I didn't have time for legal lectures. I had a sample of death in my pocket, and I was racing against a clock that Tiffany had set. The rain pounded on the roof of the truck, sounding like a drumbeat for war. She wanted a heart attack. I was about to give her one. The pencil case in my pocket felt radioactive. It was just a cheap piece of plastic, probably cost $2 at a drugstore, but inside it was enough dust to answer the question that was keeping my son in a hospital bed. I drove straight to the industrial district on the south side of Chicago. I didn't go to a police lab. I couldn't. I went to see an old friend named Wallace. Wallace wasn't a doctor. He was a chemical engineer who ran a private soil and material testing facility. Back in the day, whenever I needed to know if a plot of land was contaminated with lead or asbestos before I laid a foundation, I went to Wallace. He didn't ask questions, he just gave you the data. He was a man of science, and right now I needed science more than I needed the law. His lab was in a converted warehouse that smelled like ozone and sulfur. I banged on the metal shutter until he rolled it up. Wallace was 68, a thin man with glasses so thick they magnified his eyes like an owl. He looked at me, then at the frantic expression on my face, and he stepped aside to let me in without a word. "I need you to run a sample," I said, placing the pencil case on his stainless steel table. "Soil?" he asked. "No," I said. "Something else. Something that might be killing my son." Wallace stopped wiping his glasses. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw that I wasn't joking. He put on a pair of latex gloves, opened the container, and used a pair of tweezers to extract a pinch of the greenish-gray dust. He placed it into a small glass vial and walked over to his mass spectrometer. It was a machine the size of a photocopier that hummed with a low, steady vibration. "How long?" I asked. "Give me 20 minutes," he said. "Coffee is in the pot. It is stale, but it is hot." I couldn't drink coffee. I couldn't sit down. I paced back and forth in that cold, sterile room. Every minute that ticked by was a minute Jamal was lying in that ICU defenseless. I thought about the bruise on Maya's arm. I thought about Tiffany's smile. I thought about the kayak. I felt like a building that was groaning under too much weight, the support beams starting to buckle. The machine beeped. Then it started printing out a graph. Wallace ripped the paper off and held it up to the light. He frowned. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the computer screen, typing in a few commands. He shook his head. "What is it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Is it poison?" Wallace turned to face me. His face was pale. "Desmond, where did you get this?" "My granddaughter gave it to me," I said. "She took it from her stepmother's kitchen. Tell me what it is." "It is a cocktail," Wallace said, his voice quiet. "A very sophisticated, very nasty cocktail. The primary agent is oleander, Nerium oleander. It is a common decorative shrub, but every part of it is toxic. If you dry the leaves and grind them down, you get a powder that contains cardiac glycosides." "English, Wallace," I snapped. "Speak English. It stops the heart, Desmond. It mimics the effects of digitalis. If you give it to someone in small controlled doses over time, it looks exactly like natural heart failure. Irregular heartbeat, nausea, fatigue, blurry vision. A doctor listening to his chest wouldn't hear poison. He would hear a heart that is just giving up." My knees felt weak. I grabbed the edge of the table. "But that is not all," Wallace continued, pointing to a second spike on the graph. "She mixed it with benzodiazepines, a heavy sedative." "Why?" I whispered. "To mask the symptoms," he explained. "The oleander makes the heart race and skip. That causes panic. But the sedative keeps him calm, makes him sleep. He drifts off thinking he is just tired while his heart is slowly shutting down. It keeps him compliant. It keeps him from going to the hospital until the damage is irreversible." I stared at the graph. It was evil. It was pure, calculated evil. Tiffany wasn't just killing him. She was engineering his death like a software program. "Is there enough here to prove it?" I asked. Wallace nodded. "There is enough here to kill a horse if you took it all at once. This isn't accidental contamination, Desmond. This is a weapon." I took the report from his hand. "Thank you, Wallace. Send me the bill." "There is no bill, Desmond," he said softly. "Go save your boy." I walked out of the lab and into the rain. I sat in my truck and stared at the paper. I had it. I finally had the smoking gun. Oleander and benzodiazepines, confirmed by a lab. I pulled out my phone and dialed Goldberg. "I got it, Saul," I said as soon as he answered. "The lab confirmed it. It is oleander. She is poisoning him with ground-up leaves and sedatives. It mimics heart failure. That is why the doctors can't find it. They are looking for a disease, not a murder." I waited for Goldberg to cheer. I waited for him to tell me to drive to the police station. But there was only silence on the line. "Saul," I said, "did you hear me? I have the proof." "Desmond, listen to me very carefully," Goldberg said. His voice was heavy, tired. "Do not go to the police. Not yet. What I roared. My son is dying. I have a lab report. You have a piece of paper from a soil tester analyzing dust found in a pencil case given to you by a 10-year-old child in violation of a restraining order outside a school," Goldberg recited. He sounded like a judge handing down a sentence. "So what?" "It is the truth. In a court of law, it is fruit of the poisonous tree," Goldberg said. "Think about it, Desmond. If you walk into a police station right now, here is what Tiffany's lawyer will say. He will say you are a bitter, estranged father with a criminal record. He will say you hate the white daughter-in-law. He will say you planted that powder in the girl's backpack to frame her. He will say there is no chain of custody. Who can prove that powder came from Tiffany's kitchen? Did you see her pour it? Did the police seize it with a warrant? No. You got it from a child who Tiffany has already painted as emotionally unstable." I slammed my fist against the dashboard. "So, I just let him die. Is that your legal advice?" "No," Goldberg said, sharp and fast. "My advice is to not blow your only shot. If you go to the cops now with this weak chain of evidence, they will bring Tiffany in for questioning. She will deny it. And while she is sitting in that interview room, she will call a friend or a neighbor to go to the house and flush the rest of that powder down the toilet. She will bleach the jars. She will destroy the stash. And then we have nothing. The police will have to let her go. She will sue you for defamation. She will strip you of any access to Maya, and she will finish the job on Jamal the second he gets home. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. He was right. I hated him for it, but he was right. I knew how the system worked. It protected the procedure, not the people. Then what do we do? I asked, my voice breaking. I can't sit here, Saul. I can't. We need to close the loop, Goldberg said. We know what the weapon is. Now we need to link it to her hand. We need to catch her in the act. Or we need to find the stockpile in a place that no one but her could have put it. She keeps it in the spice rack, I said. Maya told me. Too risky, Goldberg said. If the police raid the house based on your tip and find nothing because she moved it, you are done. We need something undeniable. We need to see her pouring it, or we need to find where she processes it. You said it is ground leaves. Yeah. Then she needs a place to grind it. She needs a place to dry it. She can't do that in the kitchen with the maid or the kid watching. She needs a private workspace, a place only she goes. I thought about the garage, the workbench, the pristine tools, the expensive kayak hanging from the ceiling. Look under the boat. I missed something, I whispered. What I was in the garage, I said. I found the passports under the boat seat, but I didn't check the boat itself. I didn't check the hull. Desmond Goldberg warned, you have a restraining order. If you go back to that house and get caught, you are going to prison for a long time. I looked at the lab report in my hand. I saw the spike on the graph that represented my son's heartbeat slowing down. Prison is just a room, Saul, I said. A coffin is forever. I hung up the phone. Goldberg was right about the law, but he was wrong about the risk. The risk wasn't me going to jail. The risk was doing nothing. I started the truck. The rain was coming down harder now, washing the grime off the city streets. I wasn't going back to the garage to look. I was going back to set a trap. If Tiffany wanted to play the grieving widow, she was going to have to audition for the role on camera. I needed eyes inside that house. I needed to see what happened when the doors were closed. I needed to be the ghost she was so afraid of. I drove toward my own workshop. I had some equipment there. Cameras I used to inspect sewer lines and ventilation shafts. Tiny high-definition cameras with long battery lives. Desmond King, the contractor, was retiring for the night. Desmond King, the surveillance expert, was just clocking in. I was going back to the house. Not through the front door, not through the garage. I was going in the way I built the place from the foundation up. There was a crawl space under the kitchen. I remembered it because I had argued with the architect about the ventilation 10 years ago. It was tight, it was dark, and it was full of spiders. But it was the only place in that house where Tiffany wouldn't look. I wiped the rain from my face. It was time to go underground. The blueprints of my son's house are burned into my memory, better than the lines on my own hands. I know every conduit, every load-bearing wall, and every blind spot. When I built this place 10 years ago, I argued with the architect for 3 days about the drainage system. I wanted a raised foundation with a full-access crawl space for ventilation and maintenance. The architect said it was old-fashioned. He wanted a slab. I overruled him. I told him that in Chicago the ground shifts and you need room to breathe underneath. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't building a ventilation system. I was building an invasion route. It was 2 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy wet mist that clung to the ground. I parked my truck 3 blocks away in front of a house that was under construction. I grabbed my canvas tool bag. It didn't have hammers or drills in it tonight. It held 2 high-definition pinhole cameras, a fiber optic snake, and a pair of wire cutters. I pulled my black beanie down low over my ears and slipped into the darkness between the hedges. I wasn't a father visiting his son anymore. I was a structural flaw. I was the thing in the walls. I approached the property from the rear, skirting the edge of the ravine that bordered the backyard. Tiffany had installed motion sensor floodlights on every corner of the house. They were top of the line, sensitive enough to pick up a stray cat. But I knew their range. I knew that the sensor on the southeast corner had a blind spot because of the way the gutter downspout was angled. It created a shadow, a narrow corridor of darkness about 2 feet wide, right against the brickwork. I pressed my back against the wet bricks, shimmying sideways. My heart was thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. If I tripped, if I sneezed, the yard would light up like a prison break. I held my breath and moved 1 foot at a time until I reached the lattice skirting of the back porch. This was the entry point. Behind a row of overgrown hydrangeas was a small access panel. I had installed it myself, securing it with 4 heavy-duty screws. Most people would need a drill to open it. I just needed the flathead screwdriver I had kept in my pocket for 40 years. I knelt in the mud, my knees protesting the damp cold. I felt for the screw heads in the dark. 1, 2, 3, 4. I greased these threads myself a decade ago. They turned without a sound. I pulled the panel aside. The smell hit me instantly. Damp, earth-rotting leaves and the stale, dry scent of insulation. It was the smell of the underworld. I turned on my small pen light, holding it in my mouth, and crawled inside. The crawl space was tight. There was only about 3 feet of clearance between the dirt and the floor joists above. I had to move on my elbows and knees, dragging the tool bag behind me. Spiderwebs brushed against my face, sticky and cold. I hate spiders, but I hated the woman sleeping upstairs more. I crawled about 20 feet until I was directly under the kitchen. I knew I was there because I could see the PVC piping for the island sink and the gas line for the stove. I paused to catch my breath. The air down here was thin and dusty. Above me, through the layers of plywood and hardwood, was the enemy territory. I located the HVAC duct that fed the kitchen vent. This was the trick. The vent register was located on the wall right next to the spice rack. If I could thread the camera through the ductwork, I could see everything without ever stepping foot in the room. But the metal was thick. I took out a small magnetic drill bit and began to turn it by hand, slowly piercing the sheet metal of the duct from the outside. It took forever. My shoulders burned. Dust fell into my eyes. But finally I made a hole just big enough for the lens. I fished the fiber optic cable through. I connected it to a small battery pack that I taped to the side of the joist. I pulled out my phone and checked the feed. The screen flickered, then stabilized. A grainy, green-tinted image appeared. It was the kitchen. I could see the granite countertop. I could see the refrigerator. And there, perfectly framed in the center of the shot, was the spice rack. The rows of jars stood like little soldiers. And right there behind the cinnamon, just like Maya said, was a jar that didn't look like the others. It was unlabeled. I had eyes on the weapon. But I wasn't done. The kitchen camera would catch her preparing the poison, but I needed to know where she was hiding the rest of the supply. I needed to see the garage. I crawled another 30 feet toward the north side of the house. The ground here was wetter. My pants were soaked through. I could feel the chill settling into my bones, the kind of cold that makes your hands stiff and clumsy. I reached the area under the garage. Unlike the house, the garage was a concrete slab. I couldn't drill through it. But I knew about the utility chase. When I built the garage, I ran a conduit pipe from the main house to the garage wall to carry the wiring for the security system and the outdoor lights. It was a 4-inch pipe, plenty of room for a wire. I found the access point in the foundation wall. I fed the second camera snake into the conduit. I pushed it inch by inch, praying it wouldn't get snagged on an old wire. I pushed until I felt resistance. That meant it had reached the junction box inside the garage wall. I checked my phone. Darkness. The camera was inside the wall box. I needed to push it through the faceplate. This was the risky part. If the camera poked out too far, she would see it. I gently maneuvered the snake. The tip of the camera had a tiny magnet. I used it to push open the spring-loaded flap of the unused Ethernet port I had installed years ago. The lens peered out. The view was perfect. The camera was low near the floor, but it had a wide-angle lens. I could see the entire garage, I could see the Tesla, I could see the workbench, and hanging above it all, glowing in the night vision like a suspended ghost, was the pink kayak. I adjusted the digital zoom on my phone screen. The camera resolution was incredible. I could see the texture of the straps holding the boat. I could see the specific knot I had tied on the pulley rope. I secured the battery pack for the garage camera to the foundation wall in the crawl space. These batteries were military grade. They would last for a week. A week was all I needed. I lay there in the dirt for a moment, staring at the 2 screens on my phone. Kitchen, garage, kitchen, garage. I was inside her world now. I was the fly on the wall she couldn't swat. I started the long crawl back. My body was screaming in pain. My right knee felt like it was on fire, and my lower back was locked up tight. Every inch was a battle. I was an old man playing a young man's game. But as I dragged myself through the mud, I thought about Jamal. I thought about him lying in that hospital bed, tubes in his arms, trusting a wife who was counting the days until he died. I thought about the way he used to follow me around construction sites when he was little, wearing a plastic hard hat that was too big for him. He used to say, "Daddy, can we fix it?" And I would always say, "Jamal, if it is broken, we can fix it. If it is built wrong, we can rebuild it." I reached the access panel. I pushed it open and breathed in the fresh, wet night air. It tasted like freedom. I slid out of the hole, covered in mud cobwebs in my hair, my hands shaking from exhaustion. I replaced the panel and screwed it back in, careful to align the screw heads exactly as they were so she wouldn't notice they had been touched. I crept back through the yard, avoiding the sensors moving through the shadows like a memory. I made it back to my truck and collapsed into the driver's seat. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there shivering, wiping the mud from my face with a rag. I picked up my phone again. The feeds were live. The house was silent. Then on the kitchen camera I saw movement. A light turned on. My heart stopped. Had I made a noise? Had I woken her up? Tiffany walked into the frame. She was wearing a silk robe. She didn't look sleepy. She looked agitated. She paced back and forth in front of the island. She was talking on the phone, but there was no audio on these tiny cameras. I watched her face. She looked angry. She was gesturing wildly with her free hand. She stopped at the spice rack. My breath caught in my throat. She reached out. Her hand hovered over the cinnamon. Then she moved it back. She grabbed the unmarked jar. She held it up to the light, shaking it. It was half full. She put it back, but she didn't put it back in the same spot. She moved it higher to the top shelf behind a large canister of flour. She was hiding it better. She was paranoid. She knew someone was watching, she just didn't know who. I smiled in the darkness of my truck. "Hide it wherever you want, Tiffany," I whispered. "I can see you. I can see everything." I started the engine and drove away slowly, keeping my headlights off until I hit the main road. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. And when she did, I wouldn't just be watching. I would be recording every single frame of her downfall. The master builder had returned to his job site, and I was about to bring the whole house down on her head. I spent the next 48 hours living in the cab of my truck and the back room of my workshop. My world had shrunk down to the size of a 6-inch phone screen. I watched the black and white feed from the crawlspace cameras until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. I watched Tiffany eat breakfast. I watched her do yoga in the living room, her body twisting into perfect shapes, while my son lay dying in a hospital bed 5 miles away. I watched her host a book club where she cried on cue, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue while her friends comforted her about the burden of being a caregiver. It was a masterclass in deception. But I wasn't waiting for the performance. I was waiting for the backstage pass. I was waiting for the moment the guests left, the lights went down, and the mask came off. It happened on the second night. The house was quiet. The digital clock on the oven read 11:15. Tiffany walked into the kitchen. She wasn't wearing the modest, grieving wife cardigan she had worn for her friends. She was wearing a silk robe tied loosely. She poured herself a glass of wine, filling it almost to the brim. She didn't look sad. She looked excited. She leaned against the granite island right in front of the spice rack where the poison was hidden and propped her phone up against a fruit bowl. I turned up the volume on my receiver. The audio from the crawlspace microphone was faint, picking up the hum of the refrigerator, but then I heard the ringing tone of a video call. "Hey, baby." The voice that answered didn't belong to a friend. It was a man's voice. Deep, smooth, arrogant. I squinted at the screen. Tiffany had turned her phone so I could see the reflection in the window behind her. I saw a man on her screen. He was young, maybe 30, shirtless, sitting on a balcony somewhere with palm trees in the background. He had the kind of face you see on fitness magazines, too perfect, too tanned, and completely empty behind the eyes. "Hey yourself," Tiffany purred. She took a long sip of wine. "God, I needed this. You have no idea how exhausting it is to play the saint all day. People keep bringing me casseroles. If I see another tuna bake, I am going to scream." The man laughed. "Poor baby." "How is the patient?" Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Still holding on. He is stronger than he looks. The doctors are baffled. They keep running tests, but they can't find the toxicity because they aren't looking for plants. They are looking for heart disease, just like I said they would." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My hand gripped the edge of my workbench so hard a splinter drove into my palm, but I didn't feel it. This was it. The confession. "So are we still on schedule?" the man asked. "I am looking at villas in Grand Cayman. I found one with a private dock, but they need a deposit by the 15th. Tiffany smiled, a cruel, sharp expression that made her look like a wolf. "Don't worry about the deposit. The policy pays out within 30 days of the death certificate." I checked the clause. "As for the schedule?" She paused, tapping a fingernail against the wine glass. "He is coming home tomorrow." "What? Why palliative care?" she said, savoring the words. I convinced the doctors that the hospital environment was too stressful for his heart. I told them his dying wish was to be in his own bed surrounded by family. They ate it up. They are discharging him in the morning. Once he is here, I control the diet completely. No more nurses asking questions. No more monitors. Just me and him. She leaned closer to the phone. I will ramp up the dosage starting tomorrow night. 2 weeks, baby. By the 4th of July, his heart will just stop. It will look like he went to sleep and never woke up. A tragic, peaceful end to a tragic short life. And then it is just you, me, and $5 million, the man finished. And the Cayman sun, she added. I can't wait to feel the heat on my skin. I am so cold in this house. It feels like a tomb. It is a tomb, Tiff. It is his tomb. You are just the caretaker. They both laughed. It was the sound of 2 hyenas over a carcass. I stopped the recording. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had heard enough to know that my son wasn't just sick. He was being hunted, and the hunter was bringing him back to the den to finish the kill. The next morning, the ambulance arrived at the house at 10 o'clock. From my vantage point down the street through a pair of high-powered binoculars, I watched them wheel Jamal out. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of ash. He was so thin that the blanket seemed to swallow him whole. He wasn't moving much, just blinking slowly against the sunlight. The neighbors were out of course. They stood on their manicured lawns, hands over their mouths, watching the tragedy unfold. Tiffany was right there by the stretcher, holding Jamal's hand, stroking his forehead. She looked devastated. She wiped away tears as the paramedics lifted him up the front steps. I saw Mrs. Higgins from next door walk over and hug Tiffany. Tiffany collapsed into her arms, shaking with performative sobs. It made me sick. It made me want to drive my truck right through the front door. But I stayed put. I had to be smart. I had to be the sniper, not the brawler. Once the ambulance left and the neighbors dispersed, the house went into lockdown. I switched back to my camera feeds. Tiffany had Jamal set up in the master bedroom on the first floor. It was easier for her, she said, but I knew it was about control. The room was isolated at the back of the house. She closed the heavy velvet curtains, plunging the room into artificial twilight. I saw Jamal try to sit up. He reached for the bedside table. "Phone," he croaked. His voice was a dry rattle. "Need to call Dad." I leaned closer to my screen. My heart leaped. He knew. Somewhere deep down in his fogged brain, he knew he needed me. Tiffany walked into the frame. She was carrying a glass of green liquid, the smoothie. "No, honey," she said softly, putting the glass down on the nightstand. "You know what the doctor said. No phones, no stress. Your father, well, he is a trigger for you. Every time you talk to him, your blood pressure spikes. I need to tell him," Jamal whispered. "Tell him what Tiffany asked." Her voice was sharp now. "That you are dying. He knows Jamal, and he is probably out getting drunk somewhere. He hasn't even tried to call the house phone. He doesn't care." "Liar," I hissed at the screen. I had called 50 times. She had blocked my number on the landline and confiscated his cell. She picked up his iPhone from the bed covers. "I am going to keep this safe for you," she said. "You just focus on resting and drinking your medicine." She held the glass to his lips. "Drink up, sweetheart. This will make you strong." Jamal turned his head away. "I don't want it. It tastes bitter." Tiffany's face hardened. She grabbed his chin with her free hand, forcing his head back. It wasn't a caress anymore, it was force. "Drink it, Jamal," she ordered. "Do you want to leave me all alone? Do you want to leave Maya? If you don't drink this, you are abandoning your daughter. Is that what you want? To be a quitter like your father?" The mention of Maya broke him. I saw the fight leave his eyes. He was too weak to resist, too drugged to argue. He opened his mouth. I watched helpless as she poured the poison down my son's throat. She wiped his mouth with a napkin, smiled that sick, sweet smile, and walked out of the room. "Rest now," she said. "I will be in the kitchen if you need anything, but don't try to get up. You are too weak." She closed the door. Then I heard the distinct click of a lock. She had locked him in from the outside. I sat back in my chair, trembling. The image of my son trapped in that dark room, swallowing his own death to please his killer, burned into my retinas. She had isolated him completely. No phone, no visitors, no way out. She had turned my son's home into a hospice, and she was the angel of death. But she had made a mistake. She thought isolation meant safety. She thought that by locking the doors and taking the phone, she had cut the lines of communication. She didn't know that the lines of communication were already inside the walls. She didn't know that the man she called a quitter was currently watching her every move, recording her every word, and planning an entry that didn't require a key. I looked at the calendar on the wall of my workshop. It was June 20th. She had said 2 weeks. But looking at Jamal, seeing the grayness of his skin and the hollowness of his eyes, I knew we didn't have 2 weeks. We might not even have 2 days. I needed to get in there. I needed to get him out. But if I just kicked the door down, she would call the police, claim I was attacking her, and in the chaos she would hide the evidence. I needed to get her to confess to someone else. I needed to get her to show her true face to the one person she couldn't dismiss as a crazy old man. I picked up the file I had prepared. The Trojan Horse. It was a risky play. It required me to swallow my pride, to walk into the lion's den and bow my head. It required me to apologize to the woman who was killing my son. I stood up and put on my jacket. I checked the recorder taped to my chest. I checked the backup audio feed in my pocket. "Hold on, Jamal," I whispered. "Dad is coming, and I am bringing the sledgehammer. They say pride is a sin. They say it is the thing that keeps men from asking for directions or admitting they are wrong. But for me, pride was armor. It was the steel spine that kept me standing when the world tried to push me down. Taking off that armor was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I knew that I couldn't walk into Tiffany's house as a warrior. If I went in there with my chest puffed out and my eyes blazing, she would call the police before I even reached the porch. I had to go in as something else. I had to go in as the defeated, broken old man she already believed I was. I sat at my workbench, pushing aside the soldering iron and the wire cutters. I pulled out a piece of stationery. It wasn't the crisp, professional letterhead I used for my contracting business. It was a piece of yellowed, lined paper, the kind an old man might find in the back of a junk drawer. I picked up a pen. My hand was steady, rock steady, but I forced it to shake. I needed the handwriting to look frail. I needed the letters to look like they were carved by a man losing his grip on the world. "Dear Tiffany and Jamal," I wrote. The words tasted like bile in my throat. I have been doing a lot of thinking sitting here alone in the dark. I realize now that I was wrong. My mind isn't what it used to be. Sometimes I get confused. Sometimes I see things that aren't there. The doctors told me years ago that my circulation was bad, that it might affect my brain, but I didn't want to believe it. I stopped writing and took a breath. Admitting to weakness I didn't have was painful. It felt like betraying my own name. But I thought of Jamal locked in that room, fading away, and I pressed the pen back to the paper. I am sorry for the scene I caused at the party. I am sorry for breaking into the garage. I just wanted to feel useful again. I know I am a burden. But before I go into a home, before I lose my faculties completely, I want to do one last thing for the family. I have 3 rental properties in the south suburbs. They are paid off. They are worth about $600,000. I want to sign them over to Maya with you and Jamal as the trustees until she turns 21. I don't trust myself with the paperwork anymore. Please let me come over for dinner. Let me sign the papers and say goodbye properly. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I just want to see my son one last time. I signed it, making the signature trail off at the end like I ran out of energy. I didn't mail it. Mailing it would take too long. I drove to the house in my beat-up truck, keeping my head down. I pulled up to the mailbox at the end of their long paved driveway. I slipped the envelope inside and raised the little red flag. Then I drove away. But I didn't go far. I circled back and parked in my usual spot 3 streets over. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. The view from the garage camera was clear. I watched. I waited. 20 minutes later, Tiffany came out. She was wearing gym clothes, looking fit and vibrant, the picture of health, while her husband rotted inside. She checked the mail. I saw her pull out the yellow envelope. She frowned at the handwriting. She almost threw it away right there. My heart hammered against my ribs. If she tossed it, the plan was dead. But curiosity is a powerful thing. She ripped it open. She stood there in the driveway reading my letter. I zoomed in on the video feed. I watched her face transform. At first it was annoyance. Then as she got to the part about the rental properties and the $600,000, the annoyance vanished. A slow, greedy smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a cat that just found an open window into the birdcage. She didn't look remorseful. She didn't look relieved that her father-in-law was apologizing. She looked triumphant. She pulled out her phone immediately. I switched to the kitchen camera, hoping she would go inside so I could hear her. She walked into the kitchen a minute later, the letter still in her hand. She was already on a call. "You won't believe this," she said, laughing. "The old fool finally cracked. He sent me a letter. He thinks he's going senile. He admits everything. He says he is imagining things." I listened, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. She was mocking me. She was reading my apology like it was a joke. "And get this," she continued, leaning against the counter. "He wants to sign over his rental properties. 3 of them, paid off. He wants to put them in a trust for Maya with me as the trustee. Do you know what that means? That is another $500,000 in liquid assets we can borrow against once the old man is out of the picture. It is perfect. It is the cherry on top." She paused, listening to the person on the other end, probably the baby from the night before. "Yes, I am going to let him come over," she said. "Why not? If he signs the papers, it proves he was lucid enough to give us the money, but senile enough that no one will believe his accusations about the poison. It is a win-win. I will have him come tonight. We will do a little reconciliation dinner. I will make a roast, and then I will take everything he has left." She hung up the phone and did a little spin, a dance of pure avarice. I watched her from the darkness of my truck, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my gut. She took the bait. She thought she was welcoming a defeated sheep into her house for slaughter. She didn't know she was opening the door to a wolf. I drove back to my workshop to prepare. This was it. I had one shot. If I messed this up, if she suspected for 1 second that I was wearing a wire or that I wasn't actually senile, I would never see Jamal again. I took off my work clothes. I went to the back of the closet and found a suit I hadn't worn in years. It was a little too big for me now. That was good. It made me look shrunken, wasted away. I put on a shirt with a frayed collar. I purposely didn't shave. I wanted the gray stubble to look messy, neglected. Then came the technology. I took a high-quality digital recorder, slim as a credit card. I taped it to the center of my chest using medical tape. I tested it, tapping my chest lightly. The pickup was crystal clear. Then I took a secondary device, a small GPS tracker with an audio transmitter, and sewed it into the lining of my jacket, just in case she searched me, just in case she found the first one. A good contractor always has a backup system. I stood in front of the mirror. I practiced my posture. I rolled my shoulders forward, curving my spine. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I dulled my eyes, letting them lose that sharp analytical focus I had honed over 40 years of reading blueprints. I looked at the man in the mirror. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man who had given up. "Perfect," I whispered. I gathered the paperwork. I took a thick manila folder and filled it with documents. I put the deeds to the rental properties on top the cheese in the mousetrap. But underneath those deeds, I put other papers. I put the lab report from Wallace analyzing the poison. I put the printouts of her fake passports. I put the transcript of her phone call with her lover. I wasn't bringing a surrender treaty. I was bringing an indictment, but she wouldn't see the bottom of the stack until it was too late. I got into my truck. The drive to Jamal's house felt different this time. It didn't feel like a commute. It felt like a funeral procession, but I wasn't sure whose funeral it was going to be yet. When I pulled up to the gate, I pressed the intercom button. My hand shook, but this time it wasn't acting. The adrenaline was coursing through me like electricity. "Who is it?" Tiffany's voice came through the speaker, crisp and welcoming. "It is Desmond," I said, making my voice crack. I brought the papers, Tiffany." The gate buzzed and swung open slowly. I drove up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, massive and lit up like a palace. It looked beautiful from the outside, but I knew what was inside. I knew the walls were hiding cameras. I knew the spice rack was hiding death. And I knew the woman waiting at the door was hiding a heart blacker than the bottom of a coal mine. I parked the truck. I grabbed the thick folder. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. "Showtime, Desmond," I muttered to myself. I stepped out of the truck, hunched my shoulders, and shuffled toward the front door. The door opened before I even knocked. Tiffany stood there wearing a modest blue dress and pearls. She looked like the perfect housewife. She looked like the mother of the year. "Dad," she exclaimed, throwing her arms open. "I am so glad you came. We were so worried about you." She hugged me. I felt her cold arms around my neck. I smelled that expensive perfume, the scent that barely masked the chemical smell of the cleaning products she used to scrub away her sins. I wanted to shove her away. I wanted to vomit. But I didn't. I let my body go limp. I patted her back awkwardly. "I am sorry, Tiffany," I mumbled into her shoulder. "I am just so tired." "Shh, it is okay," she cooed, pulling back and looking at me with eyes that shone with false sympathy. "Come inside. Jamal is waiting. We have a lot to talk about, especially about the future." She led me into the house. The trap was sprung. She thought she had caught me, but as I walked across the threshold, feeling the recorder taped to my chest, warm against my skin, I knew the truth. I wasn't the prisoner here. I was the executioner. And dinner was served. The dining room table was set with the kind of precision that usually precedes a firing squad. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine. The napkins were folded into sharp geometric swans, and the centerpiece was a bouquet of white lilies that smelled overwhelming like a funeral parlor. I sat at the far end of the table, my suit feeling 2 sizes too big, my shoulders hunched forward in a posture of defeat. I was playing the role of the broken patriarch, but beneath my jacket, the tape of the digital recorder was itching against my chest, a constant reminder that I wasn't here to eat. I was here to hunt. Jamal sat across from me. Seeing him up close without the filter of a camera lens was like a physical blow to the gut. My son, the linebacker, the engineer, the man who used to lift heavy beams with me on job sites, was gone. In his place was a ghost. His skin was the color of wet ash, translucent and clammy. He slumped in his wheelchair, his head lolling slightly to the side, his eyes unfocused and swimming in a chemical haze. He looked at me and I saw a flicker of recognition, but it was weak like a dying ember in a pile of cold, wet coal. Tiffany presided over the meal like a queen in her castle. She stood at the head of the table carving a roast beef. The knife in her hand was huge, gleaming under the chandelier lights. She sliced the meat with aggressive, rhythmic strokes. "Swing, swing, swing! I am so glad we could do this." "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sugary sweetness that made my teeth ache. "It is important for Jamal to be surrounded by family, especially now." She placed a slice of meat on my plate. It was rare, swimming in red juice. I stared at it, fighting the urge to be sick. "Thank you, Tiffany," I mumbled, letting my hand tremble as I picked up my fork. I brought the papers for the properties." "Excellent," she said, not even looking up from the meat. "We can handle the administrative details after dessert. Let's just enjoy this time together." She walked over to Jamal. She didn't give him meat. Instead, she reached for a pitcher on the sideboard. It was filled with a thick, sludge-like green liquid, the same liquid I had seen her mixing, the same liquid Wallace had identified as a lethal cocktail of oleander and sedatives. She poured it into a heavy, dark ceramic mug. "Time for your energy boost, baby," she cooed, placing the mug in front of him. "You know what the doctor said. You need to keep your strength up if you want to get better." Jamal looked at the mug with dread. His hand twitched on the armrest of his wheelchair. I am not hungry, Tiff," he whispered. His voice was a dry rattle, painful to hear. "My stomach, it hurts." Tiffany's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. She leaned down, putting her hand on the back of his neck. It looked like a caress, but I could see the tension in her tendons. She was squeezing him. "It is not food, sweetheart. It is medicine, organic superfoods. Do you want to disappoint your father? He came all this way to see you. Show him you are fighting. Drink it." I watched her hand on his neck. I watched the poison sitting there inches from his lips. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. This was it, the moment of truth. I had prepared for this. I knew she used those dark ceramic mugs because she posted them on her wellness blog last month. I had gone to 3 different stores to find an exact match. It was sitting in the deep inner pocket of my jacket, filled with plain, lukewarm water. I needed a distraction. I needed chaos. I watched Tiffany turn back to the sideboard to grab a napkin. That was my window. I let out a groan, a loud, guttural sound of distress. Oh God," I cried out. I convulsed in my chair, throwing my right arm out wildly. My hand struck my own water goblet, a heavy crystal glass filled with ice water. The glass shattered against the edge of the table. Shards of crystal and ice water exploded everywhere, spraying across the table, soaking the tablecloth, and splashing onto the floor with a deafening crash. Tiffany shrieked, spinning around. I knocked my fork onto the floor for good measure, adding to the noise. I stood up, my knees knocking together, clutching my chest. I am sorry. I am so sorry, I stammered, my voice high and panicked. My hand, it just spasmed. I am making a mess. I am ruining everything. Tiffany's face twisted into a mask of pure annoyance. She dropped the devoted wife act instantly. For God's sake, she hissed. Look at this mess. That is Belgian linen. She grabbed a handful of cloth napkins and rushed toward me to blot the water that was dripping off the edge of the table onto her expensive rug. Her back was to Jamal. Her focus was entirely on the disaster I had created. This was the second. The only second I would get. I reached out with my left hand, the hand she wasn't watching. I moved with the speed of a man who used to catch falling hammers on construction sites. I grabbed the mug of poison from in front of Jamal. In the same fluid motion, I pulled the duplicate mug from my jacket pocket and slid it into the exact same spot. I pulled the poison mug back and slipped it into my pocket, the liquid warm against my hip. It took less than 2 seconds. Tiffany was still wiping the table, muttering curses under her breath. I am so clumsy, I wailed, playing up the senility. I shouldn't be here. I am just a useless old man. Stop it, Tiffany snapped, throwing a wet napkin onto the table. Just sit down. Stop moving before you break something else. God, I knew this was a mistake. She took a deep breath, composing herself. She smoothed her hair and turned back to Jamal, pasting the smile back onto her face. The transition was terrifying to watch. Sorry about that, baby, she said to Jamal. Your father is just having a little spell, but look, your drink is safe. She pointed to the mug. The decoy mug. Jamal looked at it. He looked at me. I was still standing, trembling, clutching my napkin. I locked eyes with him. I couldn't wink. I couldn't signal. I just stared at him with an intensity that I hoped would pierce through the drugs. Trust me, son, I thought. Trust me one last time. Jamal lifted the mug. His hand shook. He brought it to his lips. Tiffany watched him like a hawk. She was waiting for the swallow. She was waiting for the poison to enter his system. Jamal took a sip. I held my breath. If he reacted to the taste, if he spit it out because it was water and not the bitter sludge he was used to, the game was over. Tiffany would know. Jamal paused, his brow furrowed slightly. He looked down into the dark mug. What is wrong? Tiffany asked, her voice sharp. Drink it all. It tastes... Jamal started. My heart stopped. It tastes thin, he whispered. Tiffany rolled her eyes. I added extra water to help you hydrate, Jamal. Stop complaining and drink it. She pushed the bottom of the mug, tilting it up. Jamal obeyed. He drank. He drank the water. He drank the life I had just handed him. Good boy, Tiffany said, patting his head as he finished the cup. She took the empty mug from him and set it on the table. See, that wasn't so hard. Now you will sleep like a baby. I let out a breath that I felt I had been holding since 1982. He was safe. For tonight, he was safe. The poison was in my pocket, not in his veins. Now, Tiffany said, turning her predatory gaze back to me. Let's talk about those deeds. I think it is time we secured Maya's future, don't you? Desmond, I sat back down, careful not to let the mug in my pocket clink against the chair. I looked at this woman, this monster who had just force-fed what she thought was death to her husband, and then turned around to rob his father. Yes, Tiffany, I said, my voice steadying just a fraction. Let's talk about the future. I have all the paperwork right here. I reached for the manila folder, the one with the deeds on top and the warrants underneath. The dinner was over, but the trial was just beginning. The roast beef sat on my plate, cold and bleeding into the white china untouched. The spilled water was soaking into the expensive rug beneath my feet, a small puddle of chaos in Tiffany's perfect world. But she had already moved on from the mess. Her eyes were fixed on the manila folder sitting next to my elbow. To her, that folder wasn't just paper. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was the final piece of the puzzle she had been assembling since the day she met my son. She cleared the dinner plates with a speed that bordered on aggressive, stacking them haphazardly in the sink, not bothering to rinse them. She wanted the table clear. She wanted nothing between her and the signature. Jamal was slumped in his wheelchair, his chin resting on his chest. The water I had swapped for the poison was in his system, keeping him hydrated, but the weeks of toxicity were still weighing him down. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I hated seeing him like this, weak and defenseless, but I knew that in about 5 minutes the adrenaline was going to wake him up. Tiffany returned to the table. She didn't sit down. She stood over me, looming like a vulture. She placed a pen in front of me. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black with gold trim, a status symbol. She probably bought it with Jamal's money. "Here we go, Dad," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. "I have tabbed the pages for you. You just need to sign where the yellow sticky notes are. It transfers the 3 properties into the trust. Once you sign, I will take care of the filing. You won't have to worry about taxes or maintenance ever again." She reached out and flipped the folder open. The deeds were right on top, just as I had arranged them. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. Part of it was the act I was putting on the tremble of a senile old man, but part of it was real. I was about to light a fuse and I was standing right on top of the dynamite. I need my glasses," I stammered, patting my pockets. "You don't need to read the fine print," Desmond, Tiffany said, tapping the paper with her manicured nail. "We discussed this. It is standard legal language. Just sign your name, right there." I leaned forward, squinting. "It is hard to see. The letters are swimming." "Just sign it," she snapped, losing her patience for a fraction of a second before reeling it back in. "Please, Dad, Jamal is tired. Let's get this done so he can rest." I looked up at her. She was vibrating with greed. Her pupils were dilated. She was so close to the finish line she could taste it. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Tiffany. For the family." I put the pen tip to the paper. I made a small scratch mark. Then I stopped. I lifted the pen. "Tiffany," I said, my voice changing. I dropped the tremble. I dropped the rasp. I spoke with the deep, resonant baritone that I used to use to command a crew of 50 men on a high-rise site. She blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. What is it?" "I have a question," I said. She let out a frustrated sigh. "What is the question, Desmond?" "Do you want to know about the management fees?" "It is all covered." "No," I said. "I want to know about the weather in Florida." She froze. It was a subtle reaction, a tiny stiffening of her shoulders, but I saw it. "Florida?" she asked, forcing a confused laugh. "Why are you asking about Florida? I have never lived in Florida. I told you I grew up in Ohio." I stared at her. I didn't blink. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because I was looking through some old records, and I found a very interesting story about a woman in Tallahassee, 5 years ago, a woman named Sarah Jenkins." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash before the screaming starts. The color drained out of Tiffany's face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Her skin turned the color of old parchment. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I watched her eyes. They darted left, then right, scanning the room as if looking for an exit or a weapon. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the ghost I had just summoned. "I don't know who that is," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. "You are confused, Desmond. This is the dementia talking. You are mixing up names." "No," I said. "I am not mixed up, and I am not senile." I reached into the folder. I bypassed the deeds. I flipped the stack of papers over, revealing the document I had hidden at the bottom. It was a photocopy of a mugshot from the Leon County Sheriff's Department. The woman in the photo had brunette hair and no makeup, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same cold, dead eyes that were staring at me right now. I slid the photo across the polished wood table. It stopped right next to her hand. "Sarah Jenkins," I read aloud from the sheet, "charged with insurance fraud and suspicion of grand larceny. Her husband, a wealthy, devastatingly handsome real estate agent, died in a boating accident just 3 months after the wedding. No body was ever recovered, but the insurance policy paid out $2 million. I looked up at her. "You dye your hair Tiffany. You changed your nose. But you didn't change your fingerprints. And you certainly didn't change your playbook." Tiffany looked down at the photo. Her hand was shaking now violently. She looked at Jamal, who was stirring in his wheelchair, his eyes wide and confused, trying to process what was happening. Jamal croaked. What is he talking about?" "Shut up," she screamed at him. She turned back to me. The mask was gone completely now. The loving daughter-in-law had vanished. In her place was a cornered animal, her lips pulled back from her teeth in a snarl. "Where did you get this?" she hissed. "Who have you been talking to?" "It doesn't matter," I said, standing up slowly. I stood up straight. I rolled my shoulders back, letting my full height fill the space. I wasn't a frail old man anymore. I was a wall of muscle and anger. I know everything, Sarah, or Tiffany. Whatever you want to be called today. I know about the passports under the kayak seat. I know about the oleander powder in the spice rack. I know about the guy you call baby who is waiting for you in the Caymans. And I know you just tried to feed my son another dose of poison right in front of my face. She took a step back, her heels clacking on the floor. Her breathing was shallow and fast. You broke into my house, she accused, her voice rising to a shriek. You stalked me. This is illegal. None of this will hold up in court. You are a felon. Desmond, no one will believe you. I tapped my chest right where the digital recorder was taped. They might not believe me, I said calmly, but they will believe your own voice. I have been recording you, Tiffany. I have you on tape talking to your boyfriend about the murder timeline. I have you on tape admitting to the dosage. And right now I have a live audio feed going to a server that you can't touch. I lied about the live feed, but she didn't know that. Fear is a powerful multiplier. It is over, I said. The game is done. You aren't getting the house. You aren't getting the insurance. And you sure as hell aren't getting my son. Tiffany looked at the folder. She looked at the door. I was standing between her and the hallway. She looked at the patio doors, but they were locked and alarmed. She was trapped in the dining room of the house she had stolen. Her eyes fell to the table, specifically to the carving board where the roast beef sat. The knife was still there. The long serrated carving knife with the black handle. I saw the thought form in her mind. It wasn't a rational thought. It was a desperate, violent impulse. She realized that her life of luxury was over. She realized she was going back to a cell likely for the rest of her life. And she realized that the only thing standing between her and freedom was a 73-year-old man and a cripple. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She moved with a terrifying silent speed. She lunged forward and grabbed the knife. I saw the glint of steel under the chandelier light. She gripped the handle so hard her knuckles turned white. She pointed the blade straight at my chest. "Get back!" she snarled. Her voice was guttural, unrecognizable. "Get back, old man, or I will gut you right here." I didn't flinch. I had faced men with knives in prison. I had faced men with crowbars on construction sites. A knife is dangerous, yes. But a knife in the hands of a panic-stricken amateur is a mistake waiting to happen. "You don't want to do this, Tiffany," I said, keeping my hands open and visible. "You are adding assault with a deadly weapon to the list. Put it down. I am not going to jail," she screamed, slashing the air in front of her. "I am not going back to that hole. I earned this. I earned this money. I put up with him." She gestured wildly at Jamal with the knife. "I put up with his boring stories and his pathetic neediness. I deserve that payout." Jamal let out a low moan of horror. He was seeing his wife for the first time. The illusion was shattered. "Dad," he whispered. "Watch out." I took a step toward her. "Just one step. Stay back," she yelled, backing up until she hit the sideboard. She was shaking. The knife tip wavered. "You think you are tough," she spat. "You are just a relic, a washed-up convict. I should have killed you first. I should have put the powder in your coffee at the wedding." There it is, I thought. The final confession. I looked at her, and I felt a strange sense of calm. This was the moment. The paperwork was done. The evidence was gathered. Now it was just physics, mass velocity, and leverage. "You missed your chance, Sarah," I said, cold and low. "And you are about to find out that this relic still has a lot of fight left in him." She screamed a high-pitched sound of pure rage, and she charged. She didn't come at me with technique. She came at me with madness. She thrust the knife toward my stomach, putting her entire body weight behind it. I didn't retreat. I braced my back leg. I watched the blade coming, and I prepared to show my daughter-in-law exactly what happens when you try to tear down a load-bearing wall. The steel blade flashed under the crystal chandelier, a streak of silver lightning aimed directly at my chest. I have lived 73 years. I have survived cancer, the loss of my wife Ruth, and 3 years in a state penitentiary for a crime I didn't commit. I wasn't about to die in a dining room smelling of roast beef and betrayal. Tiffany moved fast, fueled by the desperate, frantic energy of a rat that knows the trap has snapped shut. She wasn't a fighter. She was a killer of opportunity, a woman who preferred poison and pillow suffocation to physical confrontation. but panic makes people dangerous. She lunged, putting her entire body weight behind the carving knife. I didn't try to dodge. My knees are too old for dancing. Instead, I stepped into the attack. I used the only advantage I had left, mass and experience. I brought my left forearm up, blocking her wrist. The collision sent a shockwave of pain through my arthritic elbow, a jolt of electricity that nearly made me black out. The tip of the knife sliced through the fabric of my oversized suit jacket, biting into the skin of my forearm. I felt the warm wetness of blood, but I didn't let go. I clamped my hand around her wrist, my fingers thick and calloused from 40 years of hauling bricks and gripping hammers locked onto her delicate arm like a vice grip. She screamed a high, piercing sound of frustration and rage. She tried to pull back to slash again, but I held fast. I twisted her arm outward using the leverage of my shoulder. "Drop it," I growled. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like the growl of a cornered bear. "No," she shrieked. "Let go of me, you old fool!" She kicked my shin with her heel. Pain exploded in my leg, but I didn't budge. I was a load-bearing wall. I was the foundation. I twisted harder, forcing her arm back until the tendons popped. Her fingers spasmed involuntarily, and the black-handled knife clattered to the hardwood floor. I kicked the knife away, sending it sliding under the buffet table. Tiffany stumbled back, clutching her wrist, her chest heaving. Her hair, usually so perfect, was wild and tangled around her face. Her eyes were wide, manic, stripped of all the sanity she pretended to have. "You hurt me," she screamed, looking at her wrist. "You assaulted me. I will have you arrested. I will tell them you attacked me with the knife." I stood my ground, breathing hard, clutching my bleeding arm. Jamal was watching us from his wheelchair, his eyes wide with horror. The fog of the sedatives was lifting, burned away by the adrenaline of watching his wife try to murder his father. "It is over, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "Just stop." She laughed then. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a broken, jagged sound that chilled the room. She leaned back against the sideboard, her breathing slowing down, her face twisting into a sneer of absolute arrogance. She looked at me, then at Jamal, and she stopped pretending. "Over," she mocked. "You think this is over because you kicked a knife away, you stupid, pathetic old man? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my friends are? I am Sarah Jenkins," she whispered, the name rolling off her tongue like a curse. "And before that, I was Emily. And before that, I was Rachel. I have survived investigations by the FBI. I have walked away from 3 marriages with 7 figures in my bank account. Do you really think a retired bricklayer and a cripple are going to take me down?" She pointed a shaking finger at Jamal. "Look at him, Desmond. Look at your son. He is half dead already. His heart is mush. The doctors have documented it. The paperwork is filed. Even if you stop me tonight, he won't last the month. The damage is done. The oleander has been building up in his tissues for 6 months. He is a walking corpse." Jamal let out a sob. "Tiff, why?" "Because you are boring, Jamal," she shouted, turning on him with venomous eyes. "Because I am sick of your tech talk and your nice guy act and your obsession with your bratty daughter. I am sick of this house. I am sick of this cold city. I deserve the sun. I deserve a man who is alive, not some workaholic who falls asleep on the couch at 8 o'clock. She paced the room, fueled by her own confession. She thought she was safe. She thought it was just the 3 of us in a locked room. She thought that without a police officer standing there to cuff her, her words were just air. "I did it for the 5 million, she spat, "and I earned every penny. Do you know how hard it is to grind those leaves into powder without sneezing? Do you know how hard it is to smile at your stupid family parties? I earned it." She turned back to me, her eyes gleaming. "And you," she said, sneering at my bleeding arm, "you are going to jail, Desmond. You broke in. You attacked me. You have a criminal record. Who is the jury going to believe, the grieving, beautiful widow who was attacked in her own home, or the violent ex-con father who couldn't accept that his son was dying of natural causes? I will cry on the stand. I will faint. I will have the jury eating out of my hand, and you will die in prison." She was so confident, so sure of the narrative she had constructed. She had spent her whole life manipulating perception, twisting the truth until it fit her needs. She believed she was untouchable. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a small black remote control. It was the remote for the whole house audio system that Jamal had installed. He was so proud of it. Speakers in every room, surround sound in the dining room. He had showed me how it worked a year ago. Tiffany stopped pacing. She looked at the remote in my hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, confused. "You want to listen to music while I call the cops." I didn't answer. I pressed the button marked Auxiliary Input. Earlier, when I was in the crawl space, I hadn't just installed cameras. I had tapped into the low-voltage wiring of the sound system. I had connected a Bluetooth receiver directly to the main amplifier, and right now that receiver was paired to my phone, which was in my pocket, and my phone was on a call. "Tiffany," I said softly, "you are right about one thing. Juries do love a grieving widow. But there is one thing they love more." What she snapped. "A live confession," I said. I pressed the volume up button. Suddenly a sound erupted from the ceiling speakers. It was loud booming, filling the entire room with a digital trill. Ring, ring. It was the sound of a phone ringing. But it wasn't coming from a pocket. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. The sound was deafening. Tiffany froze. She spun around looking for the source. "What is that?" she screamed. "Turn it off, ring, ring." Then the ringing stopped. There was a click, and a voice filled the room. A voice that sounded like Judgment Day. "This is Chief Miller of the Chicago Police Department," the voice boomed. It was deep, authoritative, and amplified to terrifying levels. "We have heard enough." Tiffany's legs gave out. She didn't fall. She crumpled. She grabbed the edge of the dining table to hold herself up. Her face went from pale to a color I had never seen before, a gray, lifeless wax. Who is that?" she whispered, looking at the ceiling speakers as if God himself were speaking. "That is the man who has been listening to every word you just said for the last 20 minutes, I said. Chief Miller's voice came back over the speakers. "Mrs. Jamal King, or Sarah Jenkins, or whatever alias you are currently using, you are to remain where you are. We have units at your front gate and your rear perimeter. Do not attempt to leave. Do not attempt to destroy evidence." Tiffany looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The venom was gone. All that was left was the terrified little grifter who had finally run out of road. You wired the house," she gasped. "I told you, Tiffany," I said, walking closer to her. "I built this house. I know where the wires run. I know where the skeletons are buried. And I brought a few friends to help me dig them up." She looked at the patio doors. Blue and red lights began to flash against the curtains, a silent disco of emergency strobes. The sirens, which she hadn't heard over her own screaming, were now audible, getting louder and louder. She looked at Jamal. "Baby," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Baby, tell them I was joking. Tell them I was just angry. I didn't mean it." Jamal lifted his head. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had poisoned him for months, the woman who had just confessed to waiting for his heart to stop so she could go to the Caymans with another man. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just closed his eyes and turned his head away. "It is too late, Sarah," he whispered. The front door crashed open. I heard the heavy boots of the SWAT team hitting the marble foyer. "Police, get on the ground." Police Tiffany panicked. She scrambled toward the kitchen, toward the back door, forgetting that I had told her the perimeter was secure. She was running on instinct now, a rat trying to find a hole. But there were no holes left. I stood by my son's wheelchair. I put my hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered my hand with his. His grip was weak, but it was there. "It is okay, son," I said, watching the police swarm into the hallway. The foundation held. We are still standing. The dining room filled with uniformed officers. Guns were drawn. Chief Miller walked in last, looking calm and grim. He looked at me and nodded. "Desmond," he said, "you look like hell." "I feel like it." "Chief," I said, clutching my bleeding arm, "but you should see the other guy." Two officers dragged Tiffany out of the kitchen. She was kicking and screaming, shouting about her rights, shouting about lawyers. But when they slapped the handcuffs on her wrists, the same wrists that had poured poison into my son's cup, she finally went silent. She looked at me one last time as they dragged her past the table. There was no hatred in her eyes anymore, just emptiness. The emptiness of a person who has lost the only thing that mattered to them, the game. I watched her go. Then I looked down at the table, at the carving knife lying under the buffet, at the spilled water, at the uneaten roast beef. I took the remote control from my pocket and pressed the power button. The speakers clicked off. The house went silent. But this time it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. I sat down next to Jamal. I was bleeding. I was exhausted. I was 73 years old, and I had just taken down a serial killer with nothing but a hardware store receipt and a father's rage. Dad, Jamal whispered. Yes, son. Did you really put water in my cup? I smiled, leaning my head back against the chair. Tap water, son. Chicago's finest. He started to laugh. It was a weak, wheezing sound, but it was the best thing I'd ever heard. We sat there together, two broken men in a ruined dining room waiting for the paramedics to come and start the long, hard work of healing. The police were securing the scene, taking photos of the spice rack, tagging the kayak in the garage, but I didn't care about the evidence anymore. I had saved my boy. And that was the only verdict that mattered. The sirens outside were no longer a distant wail. They were right on top of us, a deafening, oscillating scream that shook the window panes. Blue and red lights sliced through the gaps in the heavy velvet curtains, turning the dining room into a strobe-lit nightmare. Tiffany stood in the center of the chaos, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal looking for a hole in the fence. She looked at the front door where the heavy thuds of a battering ram were already shaking the frame. She looked at the patio doors where flashlights were beaming through the glass, illuminating the terrified faces of the officers in tactical gear. She looked at Jamal, who was watching her with a mixture of heartbreak and horror. Then she looked at the kitchen. I saw the calculation happen behind her eyes. The kitchen led to the mudroom. The mudroom led to the garage, and inside the garage, hidden in the hull of that ridiculous pink kayak, were 3 passports, $50,000 in cash, and the keys to the Range Rover. It was her go bag, her escape pod. She didn't say a word. She didn't apologize. She didn't check on her husband. She kicked off her high heels and bolted. She moved with a speed I didn't think she possessed, sprinting across the hardwood floor, slipping slightly in her stocking feet, scrambling to regain her balance. She crashed through the swinging door into the kitchen, knocking a chair over in her wake. I didn't run. I couldn't run. My knee was throbbing and my arm was bleeding from where she had cut me. But I didn't need to run. I knew exactly where she was going, and I knew exactly what she was going to find when she got there. I limped after her, pushing through the kitchen door just in time to see her frantically punching numbers into the security keypad next to the heavy fire door that led to the garage. Beep, 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 buzz. The keypad flashed red. Access denied. Tiffany let out a scream of frustration. She punched the code again. Her birthday. I knew it was her birthday because she made sure the whole world celebrated it for a week. Beep, 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 buzz, red light, locked. She slammed her fist against the panel, cracking the plastic casing. Open, open, you damn thing! She tried the handle, rattling it violently. It was a solid core steel door with a deadbolt that engaged automatically when the alarm was triggered. Without the code, she would need a stick of dynamite to get through it. She turned around, her back pressed against the door, sweat matting her hair to her forehead. She saw me standing by the island, leaning against the granite counter for support. I was holding a kitchen towel to my bleeding arm, watching her with tired, calm eyes. "What did you do?" she hissed. Her voice was trembling, cracking under the weight of her panic. "Why won't it open?" I took a slow breath. The sound of the front door splintering down the hall echoed through the house. The wood gave way with a sickening crack. They were in. "I told you, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and steady over the noise of the raid. "I built this house. I poured the foundation. I framed the walls. And I installed the security system." She looked at the keypad, then back at me. You changed the code." "Last night," I said. "While you were sleeping. While I was crawling through the dirt under your floorboards like a rat, I hardwired into the main panel. I reset the master codes. I locked down the perimeter." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She couldn't process it. She thought she was the master manipulator. She thought she was the one pulling the strings. She never imagined that the old man she mocked for being a manual laborer knew more about the digital nervous system of her home than she ever would. "What is the code?" she screamed, lunging toward me. "Tell me the code, Desmond. I will give you half the money. I will give you everything. Just let me out." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had spent 6 months poisoning my son, gaslighting my granddaughter, and treating me like garbage. "The code," I said, "is the date my wife Ruth died." She froze. She blinked. I don't know when that was," she stammered. "I know," I said. "You never asked. You never cared. You didn't even come to her memorial service because you said it would be too depressing for Jamal." I took a step closer to her. "You are trapped, Sarah. You are locked inside the very thing you tried to steal. This house isn't your asset anymore. It is your cell." The sound of heavy boots thundering down the hallway filled the kitchen. Voices were shouting, "Clear room, clear." Moving to the kitchen. Tiffany looked at the garage door one last time. She grabbed the handle and pulled with all her might, screaming, crying, begging the steel to yield. But steel doesn't care about tears. Steel doesn't care about greed. Steel only respects the hand that forged it. 2 SWAT officers burst into the kitchen, their rifles raised, their tactical lights blindingly bright. "Police, show me your hands! Get on the ground!" Tiffany shrieked and dropped to her knees. She put her hands over her head, sobbing uncontrollably. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot me! I am the victim! He attacked me!" The officers didn't hesitate. They had heard the audio. They knew exactly who the target was. One officer moved in, grabbed her wrists, and pulled them behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and metallic. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Desmond King," a voice asked. I looked up. Chief Miller walked into the kitchen. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a trench coat and a grim expression. He looked at Tiffany, who was being hauled to her feet, weeping and spitting threats. Then he looked at me. "I am Desmond," I said. "Are you injured?" he asked, looking at the bloody towel on my arm. "Just a scratch," I said. "Old skin tears easily." Miller nodded to a paramedic who had followed him in. "Check him out, and get a team in to check the son. We have a toxicology unit on the way to secure the kitchen." I watched as they dragged Tiffany out. She passed me, and for a second our eyes met. There was no defiance left, no arrogance, just the terrifying realization that her life as she knew it was over. She looked at the garage door, the door to her escape, the door I had sealed shut, and then she looked at me. "You are the devil," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I am just a father, and you messed with the wrong kid. They took her away." The kitchen was suddenly crowded with officers, technicians, and paramedics. The noise was overwhelming. Radios chatter, people shouting orders, the crackle of static. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over me. My legs felt like jelly. I slumped against the island, letting the paramedic wrap my arm. I closed my eyes, listening to the chaos, trying to find my breath. "Grandpa." The voice cut through the noise like a bell. I opened my eyes. Through the crowd of uniformed officers, a small figure was running. She was wearing her pajamas, her hair messy, her face streaked with tears. Maya. She had been hiding in her room upstairs, terrified by the noise, terrified by the shouting. But when she saw the police taking Tiffany away, she knew. She knew the monster was gone. She ducked under a police tape that was already being strung up. She pushed past a big officer who tried to stop her. She ran straight to me. I dropped to my good knee, ignoring the pain. She slammed into me, burying her face in my chest, her small arms wrapping around my neck so tight I could barely breathe. She was shaking, sobbing, making small hiccuping sounds. "You came back," she cried into my shirt. "You promised you would come back, and you did." I wrapped my good arm around her, holding her close, smelling the strawberry shampoo in her hair. I rocked her back and forth just like I used to rock Jamal when he was her age. "I promised, baby girl," I whispered, my own tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging. "I told you. Grandpa doesn't break promises. And Grandpa doesn't break foundations." "Is Daddy okay?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed. I looked toward the dining room. Paramedics were surrounding Jamal. They had him on a stretcher now, hooking him up to IVs, giving him oxygen. He looked weak, but his eyes were open. He was looking at us. He raised one hand, giving a small, shaky wave. "Daddy is going to be fine," I said, wiping a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "He has a long road ahead of him. We all do. But the poison is gone. The bad lady is gone. It is just us now, the Kings." Maya looked at her father, then back at me. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in months I saw her shoulders relax. The fear that had lived in her eyes, the terror that had made her look over her shoulder in her own home was fading. "Can we have pancakes?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was small, innocent. I laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was a laugh. "Yeah, baby," I said. "We can have pancakes. We can have anything we want." I stood up, holding her hand. I looked around the kitchen. It was a crime scene now. There were evidence markers on the floor. There was fingerprint powder on the spice rack. But as I looked at the solid beams of the ceiling, the beams I had placed with my own hands 10 years ago, I knew the house would survive. It had good bones. It just needed to be cleaned out. "Come on," I said to Maya. "Let's go ride in the ambulance with Daddy. I think he needs his team." We walked out of the kitchen, past the locked garage door, past the broken front door, and into the night. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and clean. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an old man. I felt like a builder who had just finished the most important renovation of his life. The fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit hummed with a sound that was almost loud enough to drown out the steady, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. I sat in a hard plastic chair in the corner of the room, my suit jacket folded on my lap, the blood on my sleeve drying into a stiff, dark crust. I hadn't washed it off. I needed to see it. I needed to remember that the violence of this night wasn't a nightmare I had while sleeping in my truck. It was real. The knife was real. The poison was real. And the man lying in the bed looking small and pale against the white sheets was the only thing that mattered. The doctors had been working on Jamal for 3 hours. They called it chelation therapy and hemodialysis. They were scrubbing his blood, filtering out the chemical sludge that Tiffany had been feeding him for months. Dr. Evans, a young cardiologist with tired eyes, had come out to the waiting room an hour ago. He told me that we had cut it close. He said that the levels of cardiac glycosides in Jamal's system were critical. If I had waited until the 4th of July, if I had let him drink that mug at dinner, his heart wouldn't have just stopped. It would have exploded. I looked at the tubes running into my son's arms. One tube was pulling dark, toxic blood out. The other was pumping clean, warm life back in. It was like an oil change on an engine that had been run into the ground. Maya was asleep in the waiting room down the hall, curled up on a love seat with a police officer watching over her. I wanted to keep the door open so I could hear her if she woke up, but I needed the door closed for what I had to do next. Jamal stirred. His eyelids fluttered heavy and swollen. He let out a low groan, a sound of deep physical ache. "Dad," he whispered. It was barely a sound. It was just a shape made by his dry lips. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I am here, son." He turned his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, unfocused. He looked around the room, confused by the machines, the tubes, the silence. Then memory crashed into him. I saw it happen. I saw his eyes widen as the dining room came back to him. The knife, the police, the handcuffs. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice cracked. "She is in a holding cell at the precinct," I said. "Her bail hearing is tomorrow, but she won't make bail. The judge has already seen the flight risk assessment. She isn't going to the Caymans, Jamal. She is going to Stateville." Jamal closed his eyes. A tear leaked out from the corner, tracking a shiny path into his ear. "I didn't know, Dad," he choked out. "I swear to God, I thought she loved me. I thought the smoothies were helping. I thought I was just sick." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the digital recorder. It was small, cold metal in my hand. It was the black box of his crashed marriage. "You didn't know because you weren't listening," I said. My voice wasn't gentle. I couldn't afford to be gentle right now. Softness is what got him into this mess. Blind trust is what almost put him in a coffin. I pressed the play button. The sound was tinny but clear enough in the quiet room. "I will ramp up the dosage starting tomorrow night. 2 weeks, baby. By the 4th of July, his heart will just stop." Jamal flinched as if I had hit him. He tried to turn his head away, but I didn't turn it off. "It is a tomb, Tiff. It is his tomb. You are just the caretaker. I did it for the 5 million. And I earned every penny. Do you know how hard it is to grind those leaves into powder without sneezing? I let it play until the end. I let him hear her laugh. I let him hear the sound of her discussing his death with another man as casually as if they were discussing a grocery list. I clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Jamal was weeping now. His chest heaved against the leads of the EKG machine, setting off a rapid heartbeat alarm that chirped angrily. He covered his face with his hands, his fingers tangling in the IV lines. It was a sound of pure devastation. It was the sound of a man realizing that the last 3 years of his life had been a lie, that every kiss, every touch, every meal was part of a slow-motion murder. "I am so stupid," he sobbed, his voice muffled by his hands. "I am so stupid. I let her take over everything. I let her push you away. I let her hurt Maya. Oh God, Maya." She bruised her arm, "Dad. I saw it, and I did nothing. I let her tell me it was an accident." He looked at me, his face wet and contorted with shame. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I should have listened to you. You tried to tell me at the wedding that something was off about her. You tried to warn me, and I cut you off. I chose her over you. Please forgive me." He reached out his hand toward me, a gesture of begging, a child seeking comfort from his father. I looked at his hand. It was shaking. I didn't take it. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where the rain was starting to fall again. The streetlights reflected in the puddles like spilled oil. I turned back to him. "Stop crying, Jamal." He froze, his hand still in the air. He looked shocked by the hardness in my tone. "Dad," I said, "stop crying," I repeated, stepping closer to the bed. "I didn't come here to hold your hand and tell you it is okay. It is not okay. You almost died. Your daughter almost became an orphan in the care of a sociopath. You lost your money, you lost your health, and you almost lost your family. Tears don't fix that." I leaned over the bed, putting my face close to his. "You want to apologize?" I asked. "You want to say sorry for the way you treated me, for the way you let that woman treat your own blood?" "Yes," he whispered. "Then don't tell me," I said. "Show me." I pointed to the door where Maya was sleeping. "There is a 10-year-old girl out there who has spent the last year living in terror in her own home. She had to steal poison from a spice rack to save your life because you were too blind to see it. She is the hero of this story, Jamal, not you, and certainly not me. She is the one who saved you." Jamal looked at the door, fresh tears welling up, but he bit his lip, trying to hold them back. "You are going to get out of this bed," I continued, my voice low and fierce. "You are going to eat whatever terrible food they give you, and you are going to get your strength back. And then you are going to call Goldberg." "Goldberg?" he asked. "My lawyer," I said. "We are going to file for full emergency custody of Maya. We are going to file for a divorce on the grounds of attempted murder. We are going to freeze every account Tiffany has access to. We are going to make sure that when she stands trial, she doesn't have a dime to hire a defense team. She is going to use a public defender, and she is going to rot." I grabbed the railing of the bed, my knuckles turning white. "But most importantly, Jamal, you are going to be a father again. You are going to apologize to Maya, not with words, not with toys. You are going to apologize by being the man who protects her. You are going to check the locks at night. You are going to screen the people you let into her life. You are going to build a wall around that girl so high and so strong that nothing like Tiffany ever touches her again." I straightened up, adjusting my bleeding arm. "Men don't apologize with tears, son. Men fix mistakes with action. You broke the foundation. Now you grab a shovel and you start digging." "Do you understand me?" Jamal stared at me. The self-pity was fading from his eyes. It was being replaced by something else, something harder. Something I hadn't seen in him since he was a young man playing football. Resolve. He wiped his face with his arm, scrubbing away the tears roughly. He took a deep breath, wincing as his lungs expanded. "I understand," he said. His voice was raspy, but it didn't shake. "Call Goldberg. Tell him I want to see him first thing in the morning." I nodded. "Good." I sat back down in the chair. The tension in the room had shifted. It wasn't a room of mourning anymore. It was a war room. I looked at the monitor. His heart rate was stabilizing. The rhythm was steady. "Get some sleep," I said. "You have a court date to prepare for." Jamal closed his eyes. But before he drifted off, he spoke one last time. "Dad." "Yeah." "Thank you for breaking into the garage." I smiled in the darkness. "I didn't break in," I said. "I just did a little warranty work." I watched him sleep for a while, listening to the machines clean his blood. Then I pulled out my phone. I had one more call to make. Not to Goldberg. Not to the police. I needed to call a contractor I knew. I needed a crew to go over to the house tomorrow. I wanted that pink kayak taken down, cut into pieces, and thrown into a dumpster before Maya ever set foot in that garage again. And I wanted the locks changed. Not digital locks this time, good old-fashioned deadbolts. The kind you can feel when you turn the key. The kind that tell you with a satisfying click that you are safe. I leaned my head back against the wall. The adrenaline was finally leaving my body, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. But I couldn't sleep. Not yet. I had to keep watch. That is what fathers do. We watch the door even when the wolf has been caught, because we know that there is always another wolf. And next time we won't wait for the invitation to dinner. We will be waiting in the dark with the sledgehammer. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and old wood, a smell that reminded me of the churches I helped build in my 20s. But there was no mercy in this room, only the cold, hard grinding of the legal gears. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, my hands folded on my lap. I was wearing my best suit, the one I had bought for Jamal's college graduation. It was a little tight across the shoulders now, but I sat straight. I was the load-bearing wall for my family, and I couldn't show a single crack. Tiffany sat at the defense table. If you didn't know her, if you hadn't heard the recording of her laughing about murder, you would have felt sorry for her. She had dyed her hair back to a modest brown. She wore a soft gray cardigan and reading glasses. She looked like a librarian or a Sunday school teacher. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue every time the jury looked her way. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime, and for 3 days I was terrified it was working. Her lawyer was a man named Sterling, a shark in a $3,000 suit, who specialized in getting guilty people off on technicalities. He didn't attack the evidence directly. He attacked me. He painted a picture of Desmond King not as a loving grandfather, but as a violent, jealous ex-convict who couldn't stand that his son had married a white woman. He paced in front of the jury box, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice smooth as oil, "the prosecution wants you to believe that this young woman, a devoted wife, masterminded a complex poisoning plot. But look at the source of this accusation. Desmond King. A man with a documented history of assault with a deadly weapon. A man who broke into the defendant's home in the middle of the night. A man who admits to planting cameras and wiretapping a private residence without a warrant." He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "Is it so hard to believe that he planted the poison too? Is it so hard to believe that a man who knows how to break into walls also knows how to frame an innocent woman to get control of his son's fortune?" I saw the jurors looking at me. I saw doubt in their eyes. Sterling was good. He was twisting the truth until it looked like a lie. He made my protection look like aggression. He made my investigation look like a setup. My heart hammered against my ribs. If she walked out of this courtroom because of my past, I would have to kill her myself. I wouldn't have a choice. I couldn't let her near Jamal or Maya ever again. But then my lawyer Saul Goldberg stood up. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a rumpled bulldog. He walked to the center of the room carrying a large clear evidence bag. "Your Honor," Goldberg rumbled, "the defense tells a good story. They talk about character. They talk about motive. But they are ignoring the physics." He placed the bag on the evidence table. Inside was a large jagged piece of bright pink plastic. It was a section of the kayak I had seen hanging in the garage. "Desmond King is a builder," Goldberg said, turning to the jury. "He understands how things are made. And he knew something about this kayak that Mrs. King apparently did not." He pointed to the plastic fragment. "This boat is rotomolded. That means it is made of a double layer of plastic with a hollow space in between for buoyancy. It is a sealed unit, airtight, watertight. To get anything inside the hull, you have to unscrew the seat assembly, break the factory seal, and reach into the dark, narrow space between the layers." Goldberg signaled to the bailiff, who turned on a projector screen. A photograph appeared. It was a picture taken inside the hull of the kayak, illuminated by a forensic light. When the police seized this boat, they found the passports under the seat cushion, yes. But Desmond King insisted they look deeper. He insisted they cut the boat open. And when they did, they found this. The next photo showed a stash that made the jury gasp. Taped to the inner wall of the kayak, deep inside, where no casual observer would ever look, were 3 large glass jars. They weren't full of powder. They were full of dried leaves, raw oleander leaves. And next to them was a small marble mortar and pestle. Tiffany shifted in her seat. The tissue stopped dabbing her eyes. She stared at the screen, her face going pale. "She didn't just buy the poison," Goldberg continued. "She made it. She created a factory inside her escape vehicle. She was so arrogant, so sure of herself that she kept the raw materials. Maybe to save money. Maybe because she planned to use them again on her next victim." Goldberg walked over to the witness stand where the lead forensic technician was waiting. Agent Goldberg asked, "Can you tell the jury what you found on those jars? And more importantly, what you found on the sticky side of the duct tape that held them to the inner wall of the boat?" The technician leaned into the microphone. "We found fingerprints," he said, "clear, preserved, latent prints. Because the hull was sealed, there was no dust, no moisture, no degradation. The prints were as fresh as the day they were made." "And whose prints are they?" Goldberg asked. "They belong to the defendant, Tiffany King, also known as Sarah Jenkins." And the technician added, looking straight at Tiffany, "We found something else. On the handle of the mortar and pestle trapped in the stone texture, we found microscopic traces of skin cells, DNA. It matches the defendant. And mixed into that DNA was high-concentration oleander dust." The courtroom went silent. the kind of silence that feels heavy like the air before a tornado touches down. Sterling, the defense lawyer, slumped in his chair. He knew it was over. He could argue that I planted the powder in the pencil case. He could argue that I manipulated the audio recording, but he couldn't argue that I managed to plant her DNA and fingerprints inside a sealed plastic boat hull that required tools to open, all while she was living in the house. Goldberg turned to the jury. Desmond King didn't plant this, he said softly. He simply told us where to look. He knew that a person who builds a life on lies always needs a place to hide the bricks. Tiffany King thought she was smarter than everyone in this room. She thought she could hide murder inside a hobby. She was wrong. He sat down. I looked at Tiffany. She wasn't looking at the jury anymore. She was looking at the table, her hands trembling violently. The act was gone. The librarian cardigan couldn't hide the monster anymore. She looked small. She looked cheap. She looked like exactly what she was, a grifter who had finally run out of luck. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they came back, they didn't look at her. That is how you know. If the jury looks at the defendant, there might be mercy. If they look at the judge, the hammer is coming down. They looked at the judge. We find the defendant, Tiffany King, guilty on all counts. The foreman read, attempted murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, identity theft, aggravated assault. The judge, a stern woman with glasses on the end of her nose, looked down at Tiffany. Mrs. King, she said, in my 20 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion and I have seen crimes of desperation. This was neither. This was a crime of cold, calculated greed. You slowly tortured your husband for months. You terrorized a child. You tried to frame a grandfather who was only trying to save his family. You are a predator in the truest sense of the word. Tiffany stood up. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She looked around the room, looking for an ally, looking for a way out. But there were no exits. The doors were guarded. The windows were barred. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the judge said, her gavel coming down with a sound like a gunshot. You will never harm another family again. Tiffany screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a raw animal noise of despair. She lunged toward the table, grabbing for a water pitcher, maybe to throw it, maybe to use it as a weapon. But the bailiffs were on her instantly. They grabbed her arms, pulling her back. I am innocent, she shrieked, her face contorted and ugly. He set me up. The old man set me up. Jamal. Tell them I looked back at the gallery. Jamal was sitting in his wheelchair in the aisle. He looked stronger than he had in weeks. He was holding Maya's hand. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved, the woman who had tried to kill him. He didn't look away this time. He looked right at her. And then slowly he turned his wheelchair around. Let's go, Dad, he said. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I watched them drag her out through the side door. She was kicking and spitting, fighting until the very end, but she was gone. The poison was flushed out of the system. I walked over to Jamal and Maya. Maya looked up at me, her eyes big and bright. Is she gone forever? She asked. Forever, baby, I said. She is going to a place where the walls are thick and the doors don't open from the inside. We walked out of the courthouse and into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was shining, reflecting off the puddles on the sidewalk. The air smelled of exhaust and hot dogs and wet pavement. It smelled like the city. It smelled like life. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. My knee hurt. My arm still ached where the stitches were pulling, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Jamal looked up at me. Dad, he said. I was thinking. The garage, it is empty now. Yeah, I said. I had the crew clear it out yesterday. I was thinking we could turn it into a wood shop, he said. You still have your old tools, right? I want to learn. I want to build something. Maybe we can build a playhouse for Maya, a real one, with a foundation. I looked at my son. I saw the shadow of the boy who used to follow me around with a plastic hard hat, but I also saw a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side. I put my hand on his shoulder. I still have the tools, son, I said, and I think a playhouse is a good start, but we are going to do it right. We are going to dig deep. We are going to use pressure-treated lumber, and we are going to use galvanized bolts. Why? Maya asked, skipping alongside us. Because, baby girl, I said, looking back at the courthouse one last time. When kings build something, we build it to last. And we make sure that nothing, not wind, not rain, and certainly not monsters, can ever tear it down. We walked toward the parking lot, 3 generations of us battered but unbroken. The foundation had held, and now it was time to start framing the future. The reciprocating saw screamed as it bit into the neon-pink plastic. It was a violent, jagged sound tearing through the quiet of the Saturday afternoon, but to me it sounded like a choir of angels. That boat, that ridiculous floating coffin where she hid her poisons and her passports, was finally getting what it deserved. I held the hull steady with my gloved hands while Jamal guided the blade. He wasn't shaking. His hands were steady, his forearms flexed with renewed muscle, the sawdust clinging to the sweat on his skin. 1 year. It has been exactly 365 days since the police dragged Tiffany out of this house in handcuffs. 365 days of detox, of therapy, of legal battles, and of rebuilding a family that was almost demolished. Jamal turned off the saw. The pink kayak fell into 2 equal halves on the concrete floor of the garage, the same floor where Tiffany had threatened to frame me. The same floor where I had crawled through the wall to plant a camera. But it didn't look like a crime scene anymore. The walls were covered in pegboard hung with hammers, wrenches, and chisels. The smell of expensive perfume and chemical cleaners was gone, replaced by the honest, earthy scent of cedar sawdust and wood glue. Jamal lifted his safety goggles and wiped his forehead. He looked at the 2 pieces of plastic lying at his feet. "Well," he said, a grin spreading across his face, "it is definitely not seaworthy anymore." I laughed. It was a deep belly laugh that felt good in my chest. No, son, I don't think she is going to be paddling to the Caymans in that. From the corner of the garage, a small voice chimed in. It looks like a giant watermelon that someone painted the wrong color. Maya was sitting on a high stool at the new workbench I had built for her. She was wearing a denim apron that was 3 sizes too big, covered in paint splatters. She was holding a sanding block, smoothing the edges of a birdhouse we were building together. She looked healthy. Her cheeks were round and pink, not gaunt like they were a year ago. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by the sparkle of a child who knows she is safe. "So what is the plan, boss?" Jamal asked, looking at his daughter. "We cut it in half just like you ordered." "Now what?" Maya hopped off the stool. She walked over to the severed kayak. She kicked it lightly with her sneaker. "I want to fill them with dirt," she declared. "I want to put them in the driveway. And I want to plant petunias in them. Purple ones, because purple clashes with pink, and I think that would be funny." I looked at Jamal. He looked at me. We both smiled. "Purple petunias it is," Jamal said. He picked up 1/2 of the boat, tossing it easily onto his shoulder. He was strong again. He had gained back the 40 pounds the poison had stripped from him. He ran 3 miles every morning. He cooked dinner every night. He was the father I always knew he could be, the father he was before Tiffany got her claws into him. We carried the plastic shells out to the driveway. The sun was shining on the house. It looked different now. We had repainted the shutters. We had torn out the hydrangeas where I used to hide to access the crawl space and planted rose bushes instead. Roses have thorns. They are pretty, but they defend themselves. I liked that. As we filled the kayak halves with potting soil, I watched my son and granddaughter. They were laughing. Jamal was teasing Maya, smudging a little dirt on her nose, and she was squealing, chasing him with the garden hose. It was a normal, boring, beautiful Saturday. It was the kind of day that Tiffany would have hated. She would have called it mundane. She would have wanted a gala or a trip or some drama to feed her ego. But to us, this boredom was a luxury. It was the peace we had fought for. Jamal caught me watching them. He stopped laughing for a second. He walked over to me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. "You are quiet." "I am fine," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Just admiring the landscaping." Jamal looked at the house. He took a deep breath. "I got the letter from the prison today," he said quietly. "The notification." I stiffened. "Tiffany." "Yeah." She tried to appeal. Based on ineffective counsel, she claimed her lawyer didn't defend her vigorously enough. And denied, Jamal said. "The judge threw it out in 10 minutes. She is doing the full term, Dad. Life. She is never getting out." I nodded, feeling a knot in my shoulders loosen just a little bit. "Good." Jamal looked down at his boots. "I also got the final paperwork on the trust," he said. "The rental properties you signed over. The ones you used as bait." I snorted. "I never actually signed those deeds, Jamal. I faked the signature. Remember, I stopped before I finished the last name." "I know," Jamal smiled. But I had Goldberg draw up new ones, real ones. I put the house, the insurance settlement, and my savings into the trust for Maya, and I named you as the co-trustee. Me, I asked. Jamal. I am 74. I might not be around to manage a trust in 10 years. You will be around, Jamal said firmly. You are too stubborn to go anywhere. Besides, I need you on the paperwork. You are the only one who reads the fine print. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, reassuring weight. I love you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was too blind to see the truth. I patted his hand. I love you too, son. Now grab a bag of fertilizer. Those petunias aren't going to grow themselves. We finished the planting as the sun started to go down. The pink kayak, once a vessel of escape for a murderer, was now full of dirt and purple flowers sitting by the driveway like a trophy of our victory. Maya watered them until the water ran out the drain holes we had drilled. Can we have pizza tonight? Maya asked. With extra pepperoni, I think we earned it, Jamal said. Go wash up and scrub under your fingernails. I don't want to see any potting soil at the dinner table. They went inside. I stayed out for a minute. The streetlights were flickering on. The neighborhood was quiet. I walked to the garage. I pressed the button on the wall. The door rolled down the heavy motor, humming a low, steady note. I watched it until it hit the concrete floor with a solid thud. Then I walked to the side door, the one I had broken into a year ago. We had replaced the jamb. We had installed a new deadbolt, a grade 1 commercial deadbolt, the kind they use on banks. I pulled my keys out of my pocket. My hand didn't shake anymore, but the habit was there. It would always be there. I inserted the key. I turned it. I felt the bolt slide into the striker plate. Clunk. It was the sound of safety. I walked around the perimeter of the house. I checked the windows. I checked the crawlspace access panel. I checked the motion sensors. Everything was secure. Everything was locked tight. Some people might say I am paranoid. They might say that Tiffany is in a cell so I can relax. They might say the war is over. But they are wrong. Evil doesn't die. It just changes its face. It changes its name. It waits for you to get comfortable. It waits for you to leave the door unlocked because you think you live in a nice neighborhood. I stood on the front porch looking out at the darkness. I wasn't afraid of it anymore, but I respected it. I am Desmond King. I am a builder. I am a father. And I am the watchman on the wall. I turned back to the house. Through the front window, I could see Jamal and Maya setting the table. They were safe. They were happy. And as long as there was breath in my lungs, they would stay that way. I opened the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. Click. And that, my friends, is the most beautiful sound in the world. The sun is setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. I am sitting on my front porch, the same porch I built with my own hands 30 years ago. The wood is warm under my palms. My iced tea is sweating on the railing. From the backyard, I can hear the sound of a hammer hitting a nail. It is a steady, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. It is the sound of my son Jamal building a roof for Maya's new playhouse. A year ago, he couldn't lift a glass of water without shaking. Today, he is framing a structure that will shelter his daughter. I watch the neighborhood. The street lights are just starting to flicker on. Mrs. Higgins next door is walking her poodle. The mailman is making his final round. Everything looks normal. Everything looks safe. But as I sit here rocking slowly in my chair, I know the truth about safety. I know that safety is an illusion we build to help us sleep at night. For 73 years, I thought I knew what an enemy looked like. I thought an enemy was a man with a gun in a liquor store. I thought an enemy was a corrupt foreman trying to cheat you out of your wages. I thought an enemy was a system that looked at a man with my skin color and saw a threat instead of a citizen. I spent my life building walls to keep those enemies out. I put deadbolts on the doors. I installed alarm systems. I taught my son to be careful when he walked down the street. But I was wrong. The most dangerous enemy does not climb over your fence in the middle of the night. The most dangerous enemy does not wear a ski mask. Sometimes the enemy has a key to your front door. Sometimes the enemy sleeps in your guest room. Sometimes the enemy is the person waking you up with a smile and a glass of juice, whispering that they love you while they measure out the poison. I look at my hands. They are old hands, scarred and wrinkled. They have held babies, and they have held weapons. They have built skyscrapers, and they have dug graves. But the most important thing these hands ever did was break into a garage. I think about the people who told me to mind my own business. I think about the police officer at the school who looked at me like a criminal. I think about my own lawyer Goldberg telling me to follow the procedure. If I had listened to them, if I had been a polite, law-abiding old man, my son would be in the ground right now. Tiffany would be sipping a margarita in the Caymans, spending his life insurance money. And Maya, I don't even want to let my mind go to the dark place of what would have happened to Maya. We live in a world that tells us to be nice. We are taught to ignore our gut feelings because we don't want to be rude. We don't want to cause a scene at a wedding. We don't want to accuse a family member of something terrible. We swallow our doubts. We make excuses for the bruises. We tell ourselves that we are just imagining things. But I am here to tell you that your gut does not lie. That feeling in the pit of your stomach, that little voice that says something is wrong, that is not paranoia. That is your survival instinct. That is the ancient part of your brain recognizing a predator before your eyes can see the teeth. Tiffany wore a beautiful mask. She spoke with a gentle voice. She played the part of the perfect wife so well that she fooled the doctors, the neighbors, and even her husband. But she couldn't fool a grandfather. She couldn't fool the man who knows that when a house settles too fast, it means the foundation is rotting. I hear Maya laugh in the backyard. It is a loud, free sound. She isn't whispering anymore. She isn't looking over her shoulder. She is just a child playing in the dirt. That laugh is my paycheck. That laugh is my reward. I take a sip of my tea. It is bitter and cold just the way I like it. People ask me if I hate Tiffany. They ask if I want revenge. I tell them I don't have time for hate. Hate is for people who have nothing else to build. I am too busy. I have a son to help recover. I have a granddaughter to raise. I have a garage to organize. But I will say this, there is a specific kind of satisfaction in knowing exactly where she is. Every night when I lock my doors, I think about the door to her cell slamming shut. I think about the lights going out at the state penitentiary. I think about her sitting on a metal cot, realizing that all her schemes, all her passports, and all her beauty couldn't save her from the truth. She thought she was smarter than us. She thought she was playing chess while we were playing checkers. But she forgot the most important rule of the game. You never mess with a man's family. You never threaten the blood. Because a man who has nothing to lose is dangerous, but a man who has everything to protect is unstoppable. The sun is almost gone now. The shadows are stretching long across the lawn. Jamal comes around the corner of the house, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Hey, Dad," he calls out. "We are done for the day. Maya wants to know if you want to watch a movie." I smile. The darkness is coming, but I am not afraid of it. I have my lights, I have my locks, and I have my family. I stand up, my knees popping. I look directly at you, whoever you are listening to my voice. Maybe you are driving home from work. Maybe you are cooking dinner. Maybe you are sitting in a hospital waiting room wondering why your loved one isn't getting better. Listen to me. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. If someone looks at your child the wrong way, pay attention. Don't worry about being crazy. Don't worry about being loud. Be the person who breaks down the door. Be the person who asks the hard questions. Because the monsters are real. And sometimes the only thing standing between them and the people you love is you. I look at the driveway one last time. I look at the planters. Two halves of a pink plastic boat filled with dark earth and blooming purple petunias. That boat was supposed to be her getaway vehicle. It was supposed to carry her to a new life of stolen wealth. But in the end, it only took her to one place. That boat carried her straight to prison. And my family, I look at Jamal holding the door open for me. I look at Maya dancing in the hallway. We are still here. We are standing tall. We are solid. We are resolute. We are steadfast. We are unshakable. We are just like the foundation of this house that I poured with my own sweat and blood 40 years ago. Concrete, reinforced with steel, and built to last forever. Trust is a luxury, but vigilance is a necessity. Throughout this ordeal, I learned that evil often wears a beautiful mask and speaks with a gentle voice. It does not march in with drums. It creeps in on soft slippers, serving poison in a crystal glass. True love is not just about hugs and gifts. Sometimes it is about breaking down doors, violating privacy, and digging through the darkest secrets to protect your blood. I saved my son not because I was polite, but because I was willing to be the bad guy to reveal the real monster. Protect your pack no matter the cost. If this story gave you chills or made you want to hug your family a little tighter, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share more stories like this one. And I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Stay safe out there, and remember to check your locks.